There are over 2 million jobs that are listed for Security Plus, and if you thought that Security Plus was outdated or it was not in demand anymore, you would be surprised to see how many companies still require Security Plus as one of their certifications to get you into the Security Plus or to any kind of a cybersecurity job. The average Security Plus salary is over $70,000. If you're in the bottom 25th percentile, you're making $49,000. And if you're in the top 75th percentile, you're making $87,000. And of course, if you're in the top earners, you're making over $110,000 per year. That is not a bad chunk of change. In this training series, we are going to go through the Security Plus SY0-701 examination prep. This training series is broken down into two major parts. One of them is the lecture that we're going to be going through. And then there's this, for each section, there's going to be practice questions that are available that are going to be inside of this slideshow that we have over here. And for each major section, there's a series of questions. There's literally over 600 slides that are here that have practice questions in them. And again, for what is cybersecurity, there's going to be a bunch of questions and so on and so forth. And legally, just a quick note about those questions, we are prohibited by law and by non-disclosure agreements and a variety of other reasons. We can't use the exact questions that are on the examinations. But what we did was we created a bunch of multiple choice questions that will prep you. And then there's also scenario-based questions, which is very similar to what you'll be experiencing when you actually go through the examination. So you will need to know what goes on with these various scenarios and how to be able to choose your answers, so on and so forth. And then I pretty much teach you, this is the way that I take examinations, is that if I don't know exactly what the answer is, then we go by process of elimination, and then we go through the logic of trying to find the answers. Instead of me just spitting answers at you and then telling you this is what the answer is, we actually go through the logic of trying to find each one of the answers. And at the very least, if you aren't sure exactly what the answer is going to be, I'll show you the process of trying to work through the logic so that you can actually kind of deduce and get rid of all of the wrong answers and then find the correct answer, which, it's worked for me for CYSA Plus and of any other examination I've ever taken. That's kind of how I approach it. So that is the note on the practice questions. And then at the very, very end of this document that we have over here on the very, very last page, this is a massive document as well, but on the very last page that we have over here, there's all of the links for the practice exams that you see here. So these are all Security Plus mock exams. There's 24 mock exams, and then at the bottom we have 10 exam acronym quizzes, because there's a lot of freaking acronyms in the world of ethical hacking, cybersecurity, all of that stuff. So these things are very, very useful. I found them very, very useful. I think every single person that has gone through them finds them very, very useful. And this is all included as a part of this training document, as well as these practice questions that you see in the slideshow. Now, the way you can get access to these documents and these practice questions and exams is by joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. And this is the premier YouTube community for security professionals and hackers. And we have 4 tiers of memberships. We have the Cyber Supporter, which is our beginner tier membership, and they get access to their own Discord server that gives them access to me as well as all of our advanced members and early access to content and a few other perks as well. And then we have our advanced memberships, which is the Cyber Agent, Guardian, and Master. And each one of these tiers gets access to the exclusive content and the exclusive downloads. For example, the Security Plus documents, practice exams, and practice questions. They also get access to their own Discord servers and Python automations that they get every single month and live streams that they get with me every single month and a bunch of other perks that are available for them for each level of these memberships. Now, to give you a comparison of what would be like instead of using the Hackaholics Anonymous membership, if you wanted to go and get all of these training documents through CompTIA, for example, these are the prices from CompTIA. And so, of course, the exam voucher itself is $404. The basic bundle, which basically includes just a self-paced study guide, which is that training document that you saw, is what? 581 minus 404. So we got a little bit less than $180 difference. So just the study guide is approximately $180. And then we have, if you wanted to get the study guide as well as some practice questions, you would get an extra $200 that's attached to it. And then if you wanted to get the e-learning bundle, which has those labs and some training videos and so on and so forth, you're looking at $1,000. Now, again, this $1,000 includes this $404 exam voucher. So let's say about $600 $200 is what it would cost to get a study guide, practice questions, and training videos. Now, the training videos that you're getting right now are absolutely free. It's my gift to you as just being a viewer from this channel. If you want to subscribe, that would be amazing, and that would help us out a lot. But the training videos are completely yours for free, and there's a lot of amazing content inside of these training videos. So just by watching these training videos, you will be very well informed. But then if you just join as a cyber agent, which is $24.99 a month, you will get access to the training document, which is this massive document that has all of the lectures and all the questions that are in here, as well as the slideshow that you can use to prep yourself for the questions and for the examination, as well as all of the practice exams that is at the very bottom of this document that have direct links to a bunch of different mock exams. All of that would be $24.99. That is my spiel right here. That's my plug for Hackaholics Anonymous, and I really hope that you do consider it. Now, to join Hackaholics Anonymous, you can go to our channel homepage and simply click this little join button that you see right here. You can also click the link in the description below, or you can simply go to youtube.com/@HankHacksHackers/join, and then you will see the pop-up that pops up on the screen that asks you to join Hackaholics Anonymous. Now, whether or not you decide to join is totally up to you. I fully understand if you choose not to. At the very least, you have access to these training videos, and I really genuinely do hope to actually see you inside of the Hackaholics Anonymous Discord servers and the community. It would mean a lot to me, and more than anything else, I just want you to get access to all the resources that you need. And if I don't see you in the Discord, it's all good. At the very least, I hope to see you in the comment section of this channel. And that's pretty much it. That's the only plug that I have to join Hackaholics Anonymous and all that other stuff. So without further ado, let us now jump into the Security Plus training series. All right, so what is cybersecurity? And the best way that I can define this for you, it's that cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, programs, and data from digital attacks. And digital attacks could be unauthorized access. It could be damaging these various assets that we have. And the primary goal is to ensure that confidentiality, integrity, and availability are secured, and they are you could say that they have been reinforced, and this is the CIA Triad. So you want to ensure that confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information or the systems or networks or programs, data, all of that, you want to make sure that all of those things are reinforced. And the way that we do this is through everything else that we're going to be talking about as we go through this course. So the importance of cybersecurity is, I mean, it's immeasurable. There's a lot of different ways that we can look at the value of cybersecurity. And to show you this, I think the best way that I can kind of demonstrate this is to actually show you how much it costs for the average cyber attack that takes place against a company. So let's quickly actually do a Google search so we can find out the most recent valuation of these various attacks that have happened against average companies, like the average value of a cybersecurity attack. And this is according to IBM's latest cost of a data breach report, and that is 4.45 million, which is the average cost of a cybersecurity attack. So we're not talking about the big hitters that happened against Microsoft, for example. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different case studies as we go through each one of these sections. But there, it was earlier in 2024 that something happened and Microsoft systems were down and their website was down, and essentially every computer across the world that was using Microsoft was down. So it was like a really, really big deal, because literally all of the computers that were using Microsoft across the world had a day, I think, that they were down. And the cost of that day to Microsoft was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So we're just talking about one day for Microsoft. So, and we're not even talking about those types of figures, which is in the hundreds of millions. We're just talking about the average cost of a cybersecurity attack or a data breach is around 4.4 million. So let's say $4.5 million. That is the average cost of a cybersecurity attack. So when you think about the importance of cybersecurity, then you start to realize, okay, well, numerically, dollars and cents wise, it's kind of important for a company to be secure. So yes, it protects against sensitive data. Of course, it protects against personal information being lost or stolen, or financial records being lost or stolen. Of course, those things are important. It prevents business disruptions caused by cyber attacks. So basically, in the case of what happened with Microsoft's systems being down, or what happened with the MGM Grand being taken down, or all of the other stories that we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of this course. Business interruption or business disruption is costly. It costs money. And of course, ensuring that compliance with laws and regulations, which is another really big deal. So you don't want to get sued by the government, or you don't want to get sued by a class action of people. So a class of people, hundreds, if not thousands of people suing you, will cost you billions of dollars. So these are very, very important considerations for the importance of cybersecurity. And then the evolution of this whole world that we're talking about. So there, there's the securing of individual computers, or even before that happened, right? So before we even got into individual computers, and it was just people getting their very first bank cards, or getting their very first bank accounts, and then the concept of credit cards coming in, and then there was the computers that were available at schools, and then computer labs, and then inside of the organizations that people work for, and then came the individual computers that were involved into securing complex networks, and of course cloud environments. So it just keeps getting more and more complex. And as computing gets more complex, and now you have a personal computer, you essentially have a supercomputer in your pocket, right? You may even be watching this on your phone, that little supercomputer that we're talking about. If you ask somebody 30 years ago if they would be able to do a video chat with somebody across the world that they haven't seen or they haven't spoken to, and they would be able to do it for free, essentially at the cost of their internet access, and they didn't have to buy a really fancy computer or a camera and do this whole crazy setup, and they could do it without getting a calling card or a phone card. Most people would not even believe you, right? People would think you're crazy. So we've gone from these massive computers that are the size of a room, essentially, to computers that are kind of the size of your desk, and then to computers that became these boxes that we have on our desk, and then we have these laptops, and then the laptops turn into little cell phones that you can use, or tablets that you can use, and now it's in a cloud environment, which is technically there's no physical infrastructure or any physical need. You can kind of use your computer to get access to a much stronger computer that's sitting on a server at AWS or Google Cloud or something. So these are all advancements, and as the world of computing gets more advanced, so does the need for cybersecurity, and so does the evolution of cybersecurity. It just keeps evolving because computing keeps evolving, and it's very important for you to wrap your head around that, which is why in the intro I referenced this is a never-ending process, because computers are going to keep getting more involved. Operating systems are Operating systems are going to get more evolved, and it's just going to get more and more complex. And then, of course, there is AI, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and the relevance of AI in cybersecurity, and how certain organizations or certain countries are using AI to attack companies and other countries, and then how we can use AI to create cybersecurity agents, and the importance of AI and machine learning in cybersecurity. And of course, there's Internet of Things, which is, it could be your freaking microwave. If your microwave is connected to the internet so that you can control it with your phone, that means that your microwave is another attack vector that somebody can use to potentially hack you. So Internet of Things is anything that is connected to the internet. It could be your TV, it could be your thermostat, it could be your refrigerator, it could be anything that connects to the internet. And then, of course, there's the advanced threat detection system. So this is just the intro, right? This is why we need to understand what cybersecurity actually is, why it's important, and how it's going to continuously evolve, and what that requires from you as the security professional, and why you need to continually evolve. The CIA Triad is the cornerstone of cybersecurity. And this is essentially the measuring stick, so to speak. that every organization uses. Is a measuring stick that we use to determine how bad the attack was or how secure something is. So it's the fundamental principles that are used to guide security policies and implementations of security practices. So it's, again, we can consider it to be the measuring stick, right? It ensures that sensitive information is accessible only to authorized individuals, right? So confidentiality, is it secret? If it's supposed to be secret, is it staying secret? Can it easily be accessed by somebody? Integrity, is it staying at its maximum value, or is it staying at its maximum posture, so to speak? How is the integrity of the security structure or the data? Have we lost any of the data? And then how readily available is it? If it needs to be available, if somebody at any point needs to access it and it is no longer available, that is attacking the availability vector. So the CIA triad it meshes together. It's not one or the other. We want all of these things to be up to par, so to speak. So as an example, is the encryption of emails and files, so to speak, that would fall under confidentiality. So is it encrypted? Is it confidential if nobody's supposed to get access to it? Is that actually happening? Is that actually the case? And then there's access controls and role-based permissions. So that also falls under confidentiality as well as availability. So the people who are supposed to access it, can they actually access it? And then is it confidential only to those people, accessible only by those people? And then using things like virtual private networks for secure communication, which again falls under confidentiality, and make sure that the data hasn't lost its integrity along the way as it's being transferred to somebody, or somebody's trying to access it from a remote location. The data isn't losing its integrity, and we have proper availability because we're using a virtual private network, which is an encrypted connection, so on and so forth. So these are just a few examples that we can actually look at every single one of these elements and say, okay, well, you know what? Encryption of emails has a lot to do with the integrity of the email, as well as the confidentiality of the email, as well as how available it is for somebody. So this is it meshes together. That's why it's a triad. Think of it as a triangle. And then we're going to look at the visual in a minute. And then so you have the threats to confidentiality in this particular case, which could be social engineering, right? So if somebody does a phishing attack and they're trying to impersonate somebody else, or trying to get some data from you, that means that they are trying to access confidential information. For example, your credit card information or your social security number. Unencrypted data transmissions using HTTP instead of the secure version of it. So HTTP would be the hypertext transfer protocol, and then you have the hypertext transfer protocol secured, right? So this is on one port, and then this is on a completely separate port, which is the encrypted secure port for data transmission over the internet and a web browser, right? So these are just, again, certain examples, very, very basic examples, but it is the introduction of the CIA triad. And we're going to be looking at essentially everything else that we're going to talk about. We're going to look at it from one of these lenses as we go along. And you're going to see how everything else that we talk about is going to somehow reinforce this particular concept and how it actually connects to the CIA triad. As we looked at confidentiality, we're going to also look at integrity. So it ensures that the data remains accurate, it remains consistent and unaltered. So it's not changed, it's maintaining its original integrity. And the way that we can do that is, for example, using a hashing algorithm to verify the file integrity. So a hashing algorithm, as we'll discuss a little bit, essentially gives you a string of alphanumeric characters that becomes the hash value of something. And they use this a lot in forensics, where if the data is changed even by a comma or a period, so if a period goes missing at the end of something, and I'll demonstrate this when we actually get to the hashing portion of this, but if a period goes missing, the hash value completely changes. And that means that data somehow was altered. And the integrity, the original integrity of the data, was not maintained, which is why we use hashing algorithms. As we pass something along the chain of custody in forensics, we use those hashing algorithms to ensure whether or not something was changed or not. And so if I pass it on to you and then you get access to it and then you do something to it, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and then that data has now changed, the next person that gets access to it, when they run the hashing algorithm to get the hash value of that data, they're going to get a different type of hash value. And then it's going to be like, okay, well, something happened. From the last step, from the step number 2 to step number 3, something happened to this data that it no longer is the same data. And now we have to go through investigations and go through this whole thing to try to figure out why that data was changed. And then we have the version control of systems. So you want to implement version control for software development so that it maintains integrity, right? It maintains consistent delivery of a service and the data itself remains accurate. And hopefully the integrity of your overall system and architecture maintains its overall, integrity. It maintains its solidity, right? The threats to integrity would be something like the man-in-the-middle attack. So if somebody is sniffing your traffic and they capture your traffic, and now they can listen to your conversation through the internet, right? So they can either, imagine like this, I make a phone call to you, and then as I make the phone call to you, somebody else gets in on the line, and now they're just listening to our conversation back and forth, and now they're intercepting all of the data that we're transferring to each other over the phone. That is a man-in-the-middle attack. And that can be done on the internet. It can be done through, sniffing traffic and just listening or looking at the traffic that goes in and out of a network by using something like Wireshark. And then now you're just listening and sniffing through my data and the traffic that's going in and out of my network. And you can capture that information and use it accordingly or alter the information. You can inject code into something and do a variety of different tactics by just being in the middle and capturing my traffic and listening to my traffic, which is very important when we talk about just using public Wi-Fi networks, for example, and you don't want to do certain activities when you connect to a public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. You just don't want to do that. You just don't want to check your bank account when you're connected to the Wi-Fi of a coffee shop or the Wi-Fi of your gym or something like that. You just don't want to check certain things or do certain activities or have certain applications open when you're connected to free public Wi-Fi, because somebody could just be sitting there in the parking lot and just capturing all that traffic, and that person is now the man in the middle. And then we have the unauthorized modification of files or records, either by malware or by an actual person that's capturing the traffic and now doing it. There's a lot of different things that can be done to be a threat against the integrity of the company. And it could be as simple as me plugging in a USB drive into your server in your server room, and now I have damaged the integrity of your infrastructure because my little USB drive is now injecting malware into your server, which is now connected to every single computer in your building, which is connected to the Wi-Fi network, and now I can get access to your remote locations as well. So there's a lot of different ways that integrity could be under threat and under attack, and it could be, we could be destroying it or poisoning the integrity of a system or the infrastructure. And then we have the availability of the CIA Triad, which ensures that systems, services, and data are accessible when they need to be accessible. So, for example, redundancy systems. So, redundancy, think about what redundant means. It means it's unnecessary or you're repeating something, right? So, one of my favorite phrases is "Welcome to the Department of Redundancy Department." And in that sentence, you can see that the two department words, right? Those are redundant because I'm now repeating the same thing. So redundancy systems could be something like a backup server, which is why a lot of people actually like cloud server environments or cloud providers because, Microsoft or Azure or Google Cloud or AWS, any of these different companies that are providing cloud services have servers across the globe. Right? So they have dozens of servers in California and in New York and in Virginia and so on and so forth. So they have all of these servers. And if you are using something in California, for example, in one server warehouse, and something happens to that warehouse, that the server goes down, there is a way that immediately your service, your website, your application, whatever you're using, is now going to be sent to a backup server, and it's just going to run automatically. It's going to be switched automatically without you even having to do anything. And that is serving as a redundancy. So when you have multiple copies of something, when you have multiple servers that are feeding into the same exact purpose, then that is considered a redundancy. When you have a backup system or a backup server, that could be one version of redundancy. When you have the files backed up on one external drive and then you also back them up on another external drive, now you have redundancies. So they're sitting on your computer, but they're also sitting on two different backups on external drives, that if something were to happen to the computer, you now have these backups that are sitting on these external drives. So these are all considered to be redundant systems or redundant processes that will make sure that the data is available, right? So the whole concept here is that we want the data to be available. If something were to happen, we want that data to be available. If something were to happen to our system, we want that system to be available still. If a server goes down in location A, we want the backup server in location B to kick in so that we never lose service. And this is why denial of service attacks are actually such a big deal, because they're not complicated attacks, right? If I flood your network with a bunch of packets, ICMP ping packets, and if I attack your port with ICMP ping packets and I send, instead of just sending a few dozen per second, I go ahead and send thousands of packets per second. Now I'm flooding. It's called a flood. Now I'm flooding that specific port, and now your system is going to get overwhelmed, and now your service is not going to be available, which means that service is now being denied to whoever is trying to actually access it. So a legitimate user or a legitimate customer is now trying to access it, and now they can't, so they're being denied service. If it's a distributed denial of service, that means it's not just coming from my computer, it's coming from my computer and 100 other IP addresses that I have captured inside my little botnet that is across the globe, because I hacked into 100 different computers across the world, and now I'm using all of those IP addresses to flood your specific port on your service. Because usually if it's just coming from one IP address, the firewall will detect it, the intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, it'll detect it, and it'll immediately shut me down. It'll block my IP address, and I'm no longer going to be able to attack you. But if it's distributed and it's coming from 100 different locations, if it's coming from 1,000 different locations, then you have to really have a really kick-ass system so that you can mitigate that attack that's taking place against you, so that ultimately your service is available, right? And then finally, we have the threats that happen against availability. So it could be a ransomware attack, right? I log into your system, I do a ransomware attack, I inject your system, or I corrupt your system with this virus that has encrypted all of your data, and you cannot access your data without the decryption key. And I have the decryption key. And in order for me to give you the decryption key so that you can get access to your data, now you have to pay me ransom. You have to pay me money, right? So if you don't do that, then you don't get access to the decryption key, and you will never get access to your files unless you have a redundancy, unless you've been doing daily backups. And in a lot of cases, companies do hourly backups, right? They do like live backups. We call them hot backups. You have hot storage where it's constantly being backed up, so that just in case something like this happens, then it's like, oh, you know what, screw you. They just shut down that specific system, and then they'll go ahead and they'll boot a backup from one of their very many backups, and then the person who held them at ransom is SOL, and they can't get access to any kind of money or a payment or something like that. And then we have hardware failures or natural disasters, which is actually very common, which is why you want to have multiple locations that you get access for your cloud service provider, right? So if you use the same exact warehouse that is housing all of the same servers in that environment, and then you're using only servers from that one location, if there was a natural, let's say there was an earthquake or something, or there was a hurricane or something, and that particular location goes offline, you don't want your services to go offline. So you want to use the server from location A, and you want to use the server from location B, and let's say location B is on the West Coast or something. So it's not even remotely close to the first location. So if something were to happen to that first location, you have a secondary location, a redundant location that will now give you the service in case something happens to the first location. So this is all falling under availability, right? So this is the concept that we're going through, which is the CIA triad. And again, everything else that we're going to talk about is going to somehow be connected back to CIA and the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of systems and data and resources. And so here's the visual here, right? So we have the CIA triad. You have confidentiality, you have integrity, and you have availability, and they all go hand in hand. And this could be cybersecurity, it could be information security, anything of the sort that requires these various elements to be in place all at the same time. So ensuring that information is accessible only to those who are authorized to have it. That could be protecting people from unauthorized access and use, protecting data on systems in transit, in process. That could all be falling under confidentiality. You could have the integrity, which is safeguarding the accuracy and completeness of information and processing methods, so including the detection of alterations that occurred in storage or in transit, so on and so forth. And then you have the ensuring that the authorized users have access to information and associate assets when required. So when they need access, it is available to them. And that's what availability means. So it could be acceptable levels of performance, fault tolerance, prevention of data loss and destruction, reliable backups, redundancies, so on and so forth. So this is the CIA triad. It is hand in hand. It meshes together. There is not one of these things that is more important than the other one. They are all important. And this is something that will be talked about all the time in every type of security conversation. This is something that like everything is going to relate back to these concepts. So this is why we started the whole thing with, hey, this is cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is meant to ensure CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. All right, so here's our first real world example, right? So the Equifax breach. So in 2017, Equifax, which is a major credit reporting agency and credit kind of measurement agency, they were breached in 2017. And it was a major security failure that severely compromised the confidentiality and availability of sensitive personal information belonging to approximately 147 million Americans. That is a lot of victims right there. And this was recent. It was like 2017. This is not that long ago. So the confidentiality breach was that the hackers were able to exploit a critical vulnerability in their web application, and this vulnerability allowed the attackers to gain unauthorized access to sensitive data, including social security numbers, dates of birth, addresses, and driver's license numbers. This massive exposure and private information put individuals at significant risk of identity theft, fraud, and financial loss, which did happen, by the way. There are a lot of people whose identities were stolen, and I mean, there's this running joke that we have in cybersecurity where it's like, hey, you know, there is another person that has your name, your face, and all of that information in a different country. Like there's somebody that exists as you in a different country, and they have a whole life in that country, and you know nothing about it because it's not in America. So you don't know that this is actually happening, because in America is like the big thing where it's like, oh, somebody stole my identity out here or whatever. So all of our jurisdiction just has to do with the United States, but it doesn't mean that somebody in Bangladesh can't do it. It doesn't mean that somebody in London can't do it. So there are other countries that could technically have stolen all of your information, and now they're living as you in a different country, and they have a glamorous, beautiful life living as you. Then we have availability issues that happened again. So the breach also impacted the availability of Equifax's services. Following the discovery of the breach, Equifax's website and customer service channels were overwhelmed with inquiries and requests for information because 147 million freaking people were trying to figure out what just happened to them, leading to significant disruptions in service for legitimate customers. And this highlights the importance of ensuring system availability even during a crisis, which is why backup servers are important, right? So this was not that long ago. It was pretty recent. It's 2017. This is the attack that happened against Equifax, which all serves as a very stark reminder of the importance of robust security measures to protect sensitive data, especially when you are a company as big as Equifax. To fail to adequately patch known vulnerabilities, implement access controls, and maintain proper system monitoring. allowed for this devastating breach to occur against one of the biggest entities in America. So the key takeaways here is that the breach demonstrated that severe consequences of failing to prioritize confidentiality and availability happen within an organization. Organizations must invest in robust security measures, including regular vulnerability assessments, timely patching, and strong access controls to protect sensitive data from unauthorized access. And then we have the comprehensive incident response plan that is crucial to minimize the impact of data breach and ensure that the continued availability of critical services actually takes place. So all of these things are very, very important. And most of the cases that have gone through some kind of a cyber attack had similar scenarios, right? Like something happens and data gets stolen. Something happens and systems are crashed. And so you'll just see that as we go through the rest of the stories inside of this course, it happens to massive companies. It's not just happening to little mom and pop shops or little organizations. It's happening to giant companies that you would assume are secure, right? They have all this money, so why wouldn't they have robust security measures? So this is kind of one of those big eye-opening things that I went through. I'm like, oh my God, dude, this happened to Equifax. It happened to Facebook. It happened to, and I don't want to take the steam away from the rest of the presentation, but it happened to a lot of big companies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going on. So this story provides a concise and informative overview of the Equifax breach and relevant to the CIA Triad. So you can look into it more if you want to read about it. It's a very, very interesting story, and I like referring to this as bedtime stories. So if you ever have a hard time falling asleep, I don't know, you might get a nightmare about this or something, so maybe you don't want to read this before bed, but these are some very interesting stories. If you dig into them, you'll get a lot of cool information about them. Which then brings us to security controls. So if you want to ensure CIA, then you need to have really good security controls in place. So security controls are measures or mechanisms, techniques, strategies, right, that you put in place to reduce risk and protect your assets. And they are categorized by their function in the process of security. So we have the preventive security control, we have the detective security control, and then we have the corrective security control. And these are three general categories, and depending on where you go, they'll have different breakdowns of this, and they may have extra steps that goes into this. But for the most part, you have preventive controls, detective controls, and corrective controls. So let's go into each one of those. And the first one would be preventive controls. So the purpose of a preventive control is to stop the threat before it attacks. You want to prevent it from taking place, right? You want to prevent the attack from taking place. So a preventive control could be a firewall. It blocks unauthorized traffic. It could be multi-factor authentication that secures the logins to make sure that the actual person who should be logging in is logging in. And then you have the employee training programs to prevent phishing attacks. So just let them know, hey, there are these shady emails that are coming out, or there is these things that if it looks too good to be true, or if it looks like it's coming from somebody that's not authorized, please, tread softly, use these various resources to make sure that these things don't happen. And then if you really want to be on top of it, you can actually code it into the security infrastructure of your emails for your company, where if anything that shows up from a specific email address, if anything that has an executable that's attached to it, or like a weird file, or it doesn't, just anything that comes from a weird IP address, any of these things can be filtered before it even gets to the employee, so that your system, your infrastructure automatically just blocks those things before the human being actually sees it, right? And then the key concept is that they are proactive and designed to close vulnerabilities before they happen, right? So Preventive controls are designed to prevent things from taking place. So as you go through the examination, for example, and you're looking at a question, or you're being faced with a question, and we're going to go through some practice questions, as you look at these things, there are going to be certain keywords that will pop out. And then when you look at those keywords, it kind of gives the answer to you. When you look at a scenario question, you pay attention, and there's one specific thing about that scenario that's like, oh, you know what? I think I'm supposed to be looking at this type of control, or this part of the CIA Triad, so on and so forth. So that's what we have for preventive controls. Now moving on to detective controls. Detective controls identify, so they detect, right? So identify and alert about threats or anomalies. So there's a security analyst that's sitting on duty and they're looking at what's going on. They have a SIM going, they have an IDS going, so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden something is detected and they are alerted. Something is identified through the traffic as potentially malicious, and then that security analyst is alerted. So it could be the intrusion detection system. In the name it says detection, right? So it's used for detective controls. It could be security logs and event monitoring through something called a SIM, which is Security Information and Event Manager, which is another really massive tool that gets a lot of really cool things done. It could be endpoint detection and response. That would be considered the EDR software, and these are all falling under the detective control portion of this specific security control, which happens to do with everything that you need to do as far as security itself is concerned, right? So these are the detection methods, the detective methods, to make sure that anything that might potentially happen, you're alerted. It's identified and you're alerted. So the key concept is that they focus on recognizing when an attack or breach is actually occurring, and then notifying the analyst that is on duty. And then you have corrective controls, and they minimize the impact of the incident and they restore normal operation. So let's say something has taken place, so you weren't able to prevent it, you weren't able to detect it in time, and now it's actually doing some kind of damage to your infrastructure, to your company, to your data, so on and so forth. And now you need to correct it, right? So you want to minimize the impact of the incident. So if you do notice that something is happening and they're, let's say, exfiltrating data, you need to cut it in its tracks, and you need to stop it in its tracks and prevent the rest of the data to be stolen. So this could be data backup to restore compromised files, right? They injected some malware into your files, and you need to make sure that you still have access to your files, so you do regular backups. Patch management to fix any software vulnerability. So this could be something that, again, it could actually this could fall under preventive, right? So you notice that there's a new patch that is released for a specific software, and if you don't patch it, if you don't fix it, then you're going to have a vulnerability in that software that could put your organization at risk. So you need to manage those patches, and you need to make sure that actually happens in time. Then you have incident response plans to contain and recover from breaches. So if there is an actual breach that takes place, how do you contain the breach so that it doesn't spread to the rest of your organization? And then how do you recover from something that they may have done? So how do you bring that one specific computer or one segment of your network back up after you've contained it, after you've eradicated the virus or whatever the breach was? After you've contained it and eradicated it, you need to bring it back to live status, and that would be under the recovery portion of corrective controls. So these controls are reactive, and they aim to mitigate damage after an incident has actually taken place. So you have proactive right here. So that's all under preventive to make sure it doesn't happen. And then we have the happening in the live environment. So something happens and you detect it immediately and you alert about it and hopefully prevent damage from taking place. And then you have the actual situation that, okay, damage has now taken place, or it is taking place. How do we stop it in its tracks? How do we contain it? How do we eradicate it? And then get our systems back to business as usual status, so that, hopefully everything is all good and everything's running smoothly again. So if we look at our little inverse pyramid here, we have at the very top of the pyramid, we have the preventive controls, which helps to avoid an incident from actually occurring. These are proactive, right? Then you have your detective controls that identify things as they're happening and notifies somebody on the security team so that they can take further action and hopefully stop the attack from progressing. And then you have corrective. So this is actually something that has now been carried out. The attack has been carried out. It's in process. Something is being done to your network or to your data, and now you need to correct it. You need to contain it, and you need to correct it so that it can go back to normal. Then you have deterrent controls, which is very interesting. It could be something like a honeypot, for example. You have a specific location on your server or on your network that is kind of labeled to be containing sensitive information, and the security mechanisms on it aren't as strong, so that if somebody is attacking your system or your network, they're like, oh, you know what, this specific machine on the network hasn't been patched, so I think I could probably take advantage of this. And then when they actually go into it, they maybe get blocked out, or maybe they get report it to an agency, or they get in, they don't know that they're being watched, and then you're watching them, and now you're tracking them, and hopefully deterring them from future attacks, or deterring anybody who may think about doing what they were just doing from attacking you. And then you have recovery controls that is very similar to corrective controls, but this is happening in an event that you've actually been really taken down. So something has actually happened and your system is now crashed, or your network is severely at risk, and you need to take everything down and then recover your data or your systems so that you can go back to business as usual. And then you have the compensating controls that they provide an alternative measure of control. So they compensate in case something were to happen that for whatever reason one measure of control isn't working, then we're compensating in this other regard. So for example, we can't patch this particular system because it's a legacy system and we still need access to it. And I know that it's vulnerable. I know that I can't, for whatever reason, I can't patch it because now it's leaving me at risk. So there needs to be something that I can do to compensate for the fact that I can't patch this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do daily backups on this particular machine, and then I'm going to get insurance on the specific data that's on here or on the machine itself, just in case anything were to happen. Now I have a little bit of a compensating control that is going to allow me to cover my losses, so to speak, just in case this takes place. Or if this does get hacked and somebody tries to steal my data, now I have all of these backups that if something were to happen to this particular machine, now I can just restore my service from these backups that we have. So it compensates for the primary level of control that you can't do. You can't do your primary level of control on this thing. So now you have to compensate by doing another level of control or an alternative measure of control. So here's something that happened in the under the security controls example, right? So we have the target data breach that happened in 2013, and it is infamous in the world of cybersecurity, mainly because of the fact that the scope of the breach was so massive, and the consequences were also very dire. So what happened was between November 27th and December 15th of 2013, the attackers were able to infiltrate Target's network and compromise their payment information of 40 million customers and the personal data that was attached to them. So for example, the emails, the addresses, and the phone numbers of 70 million individuals. So you have 40 million people whose payment information, meaning their credit cards, their debit cards, all of that was stolen. And then you have the personal data of 70 million individuals that was stolen. The attack happened in 3 different phases. So you have the initial breach. So the third-party vendor that was compromised was basically the reason why this whole thing even happened. So they gained access to the target network by compromising a third-party vendor, which was the Fazio Mechanical Services, which is an HVAC company. So this, again, this falls under the ancillary devices and ancillary products, essentially, that could leave your network exposed, right? So the attackers sent phishing emails to Fazio employees, tricking them into installing malware on those devices. And now you have through the vendor, through a third-party vendor, now you have access to the bigger target, right? Your primary target. And you were able to do it by going through a, quote unquote, smaller company, which would be Fazio Mechanical. And then now through them, you have now been able to breach this massive company, which is Target. And then once they had that, they were able to get network access and then deploy their malware. So the credentials that they stole from Fazio, attackers accessed Target's internal network, and then they moved laterally, meaning horizontally, right? They weren't moving vertically to get higher access or higher privileges. They moved laterally from similar privileged accounts across the network until they reached the point of sale system in their Target stores, which has to do with getting all of those payment information of those 40 million customers, right? and then they exfiltrated the data. So the malware was installed on the POS systems, captured customers' credit card, and then the information, and then the stolen data was then transmitted to external servers controlled by the attacker. So this was actually a completed attack that happened, I mean, beautifully. It's like a work of art, right? So they were able to breach Target by going through a third-party vendor that was connected to Target. They used phishing, which is social engineering, meaning attacking the human, right? They hacked the human first, and then once they hacked those humans, they actually got access to login credentials. They got into the internal network of Target using legitimate credentials, and then as they were logged in, they moved across the network until they were able to get to the point of sale system in Target. Now, when you have one point of sale system, you're connected to the entire point of sale system, which means now you have access to all of the data. And then they were able to exfiltrate that data by using malware that went on those same exact POS systems, captured the customer's credit card and debit card information, and then transmitted to external servers that were controlled by the attackers. It is a thing of beauty, and it happened to a massive billion-dollar company known as Target. So the key weaknesses that were exploited were, number one, the preventive controls were not great. So there were poor preventive controls. Third-party access management was not in place, or at least the good version of third-party access management wasn't in place, which allowed those attackers to exploit vendor credentials. And then the inadequate network segmentation that enabled lateral movement within the target systems. So network segmentation, as we'll discuss in a little bit, means that you take your massive network and you break it into segments, into smaller segments, that if somebody were to get access to one of those segments, they couldn't get access to the rest of your company. And they didn't have that in place, which allowed for these attackers to move through the company freely until they were able to get to Target's POS systems. And then the detection methods, of course, was not in place, because by the time that all of this is taking place, there are so many red flags that have taken place that somebody's moving through your network and they're trying to access all these different systems. That all of that is red flags, and the detection mechanisms should have gone off. They should have gone nuts, so that somebody in the security team was being notified that, hey, there's some shady activity that's going on. You need to track this down and see what's going on. So the security team received alerts from the FireEye malware detection system, but failed to act on them in time. So they did get the malware notifications. They did get alerts, but again, they didn't act in time, which is again falling under the detection. So the method of detection would be the SIM, or it would be the intrusion detection system, but there's also the human that is involved as well. And so they didn't respond in time. Notice how there's this common theme that there's a human element. There was somebody that made a human error inside of the HVAC company that got the phishing campaign successful, and then those credentials got into the system, and then they were moving around in the system. The malware was working, and the notification came from FireEye malware detection, but then a human failed to act on them in time. So again, human error. It's becoming a very common theme if you haven't noticed already. The impact to Target was $202 million in legal settlements, fines, and security upgrades that Target had to spend. Bank and credit card unions incurred additional losses from reissuing millions of cards to their customers, because all of those cards had to now be closed down. 40 million freaking cards had to be closed down and reissued. And then we have the damage of the reputation. So customer trust in Target plummeted, which means that sales plummeted, the stock value of the company plummeted. The damage of the reputation directly connects to dollars and cents to any company. And then you have operational changes. So Target overhauled its security practices, including investing in better monitoring tools, improving vendor access management. And I bet you that they take this specific process much more seriously after suffering $202 million in legal settlements. So this is, again, this is what the $4.5 million figure that we talked about when we're talking about the average cost of a cyber attack. This is not that. This is over 200 million. So again, 4.5 million is average, but this stuff can go pretty crazy when you're looking at some of these extreme situations, and of course these massive companies that can incur really, really big losses. So these are the lessons that can be learned from this situation. So third-party security, if you're going to deal with vendors, make sure that you put them under the same scrutiny that you would put your own systems. Make sure that your vendors and their practices are essential and they are secure to prevent breaches from happening like what happened to Target. Segment your network, so break down your massive network into smaller chunks so that things like POS should be isolated from less secure parts of the network and should only be accessed by a small group of people. I mean, I know that Target is a massive company and they have thousands of employees, but relatively a small group of people should be able to get access to POS systems and the data that is stored inside of those systems. And then you have the proactive monitoring. So security alerts would never be ignored, should never be ignored. If you need to have a stronger rapid incident response team, if you need to have a better security analyst team, which is why security analysts get paid as much money as they do, because they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, right? And then if you learn how to integrate your systems with things like machine learning or AI, so that in case the human misses it, the AI doesn't, and then the AI is coded to take certain levels of action. So if it notices that a malware has been detected by FireEye, for example, or by Splunk or something like that, then we say, hey, you know what? If you detect malware, then stop it from running. Do whatever you need to do to segment that network, do whatever you need to do to prevent that software from, going nuts and destroying the rest of our freaking infrastructure. Now, as we wrap up this particular section and before we actually jump into our practice questions, there is a video that is on this channel under security principles. So if you actually just type in security principles, you'll find something that has this title. And of course, if you got access to this document, you could just click on this link and it'll take you directly to the video. So security principles like the CIA, the ISO, the zero trust principles, so on and so forth, the driving force of security engineering. It's a very good video to go and watch as you want to expand your knowledge for cybersecurity and, of course, these various security principles that we just covered in our introductory chapter. So very, very useful video, and I highly recommend that you check it out. And of course, if you got your agents membership with Hackaholics Anonymous, then you will get access to this document that has all of these links. So it's convenience, right? This specific thing is convenience. It's not like you can't go and search for these videos. You can just go and search for them and find them. But there is the convenience of, hey, let me just click on this link and it'll pop up. And then, of course, there's all of the other links at the very end of this document that have the practice exams and all of that. So all of that will be available for you as well. So that's what we have for the video for independent study. And now let's jump into practice questions. All right, so here we go. Security Plus SY0-701 practice questions. And our first section was the what is cybersecurity section. So the first question here is, which of the following is not a key goal of cybersecurity? So think about the CIA triad. And so when you think about CIA, we have confidentiality. So that's obviously an element. You have integrity, which is another element. Now for the A, you have either accountability or you have availability. So think about it. Pause the video for a quick second if you don't know it. And 1, 2, 3. The answer would be, of course, accountability. So availability is the big deal in CIA. So if you know what CIA is, then you can kind of do deductive reasoning, right? You can do a process of elimination. You say, okay, well, definitely confidentiality is one of the answers. Integrity is one of the answers because that would be the C and that would be the I. So now we're left with A. And so I guess accountability, right? So availability, oh, that's important. I remember talking about systems being available, data being available, so on and so forth. So for a lot of these things, if you actually know what a lot of the answers aren't, right? So if you can do process of elimination, you can narrow the options down and then be able to find the correct answer. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability are the foundational goals of cybersecurity. Accountability, of course, is important, but it's not a primary cybersecurity goal, rather a supporting concept. All right, next question. What does the term confidentiality in the CIA triad refer to? Ensuring that data is accurate and reliable, preventing unauthorized access to sensitive information, ensuring systems and data are available when needed, and protecting data from being deleted. So from right off the bat, we can probably say that this is not it. So protecting data from being deleted, I don't think would be the answer, right? So we have ensuring that the data is accurate and reliable. That kind of sounds like integrity, right? And ensuring systems and data are available when they need it. Available here would be the key that would be like, okay, well, we're talking about availability here. So confidentiality, meaning that preventing unauthorized access to sensitive information. So here we go, 1, 2, 3. And there we go. That is the answer. Preventing unauthorized access to sensitive information, because confidentiality ensures that sensitive data is only accessible to those people who are authorized to view it. All right, moving on. Which of the following is an example of a preventive control? So think about it. You want to prevent things from happening. This is a proactive part of the security controls, right? So security alarm systems, okay, intrusion detection systems, it's detecting, so that's probably not under preventive, right? Firewalls blocking unauthorized access, that could be preventive. And then backup and recovery systems, that seems to be restoring, right? Restorative, preventive, or corrective, right? So this could be corrective, right? So it could probably either be security alarms or it could be firewalls that block unauthorized access. I would say it would be one of those two things. But security alarms also kind of seems to be under the alert side. So it's alerting something that's going on. So I would probably bank on this specific answer. But let's see what the answer is. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Firewalls blocking unauthorized access. So they prevent controls that they are the preventive controls that are designed to stop security incidents before they occur, like firewalls or encryption. Great. Here we go. What is an example of a corrective control, right? So data backup systems that use to restore data after a ransomware attack, that definitely sounds like corrective. Biometric authentication system, that sounds like you're trying to authenticate somebody, so I don't think it's going into corrective. It's probably part of the preventive portion of security controls. Network monitoring tools, detecting, so that would be a detective control. And then firewalls blocking unauthorized IP address, we just talked about that, so that would be preventive. So probably backup systems used to restore data. Here we go, 3, 2, 1. And we have that, backup systems used to restore data. Very good. All right, moving on to the next one. Which of the following is the most significant threat to availability in the CIA triad? So the most significant threat to availability. So a distributed denial of service attack. So we talked about this in great length as I was going through it. So insider attacks, not really. Phishing attacks, not really. SQL injection attacks, not really. Denial of service, right? So think about it. What does availability do? It gives services available. Like it makes services available when they need to be available. It makes data available when it needs to be available. So if a service is being denied, that means it's not available. So if you were to take a guess, 3, 2, 1, and there it is, distributed denial of service attacks. So that is the most significant threat to availability, at least in these options, right? Moving on. A healthcare provider. So here we go. Here are some scenario-based types questions, and you'll run into a lot of these if you take the examination. So a healthcare provider stores patient records on an internal server and uses a web application for patients to access their medical history. Recently, an unauthorized individual accessed several patient records through that same application. So, which cybersecurity principle from the CIA triad was most likely compromised in this incident? Was it confidentiality? Was it integrity, availability? Scalability is not a part of CIA, so we can completely remove that, right? So it's either C, I, or A, right? So was it confidentiality, integrity, or availability? So let's do process of elimination. So they were able to access it. So availability is still there. They were able to get the data. So the data wasn't being altered, right? So they were still able to get the patient records, and nothing in this situation says that the data was altered or compromised and changed. So it seems to be that it's patient records, and somebody who's unauthorized is accessing those patient records, which means that what? Confidentiality was the thing that was compromised in this particular case. An organization implements a firewall to block unauthorized access attempts from external networks. So what type of security control is the firewall? So again, let's go down our lines, right? So do we have preventive, detective, corrective, or compensating? So I did show you that that inverse pyramid, and we did talk about compensating controls, but that wasn't a part of our primary three controls. So we have preventive controls, detective controls, and corrective controls. So does a firewall fall under corrective? No, because restoring and backups and all that falls under corrective. Does a firewall detect anything? Well, it kind of does, but its job is to just block unauthorized access. So most likely it is what? It's preventive, right? So it's a preventive security control, which is a firewall. And then we have the ransomware attack. So the IT team goes through a ransomware attack, and then they restore the encrypted files from a secure backup. So they are restoring something. What type of security control is the restoration process? And again, not preventive, because we just talked about it, not detective. So what are we doing? We are correcting something. Boom, look at that. A manufacturing company suffered a cyber attack where its control systems were altered, leading to incorrect machine operations and production errors. So which principle of the CIA Triad was impacted? So manufacturing company suffered an attack where the control systems were altered, keep that in mind, control systems were altered, leading to incorrect machine operations and production errors. So the keyword here is what? Altered. So is confidentiality? No. Is it availability? No. Authenticity? It's not even a part of the CIA Triad. The integrity is the piece that we're talking about, where we're talking about altering information. So if things are not altered, that means they maintain integrity. If they are altered, that means their integrity. Oh, this is not even right. That can't be right. This would have to be integrity. I think this is an incorrect answer, which actually does tend to happen. So manufacturing company cyber attack where the control systems were altered, leading to incorrect machine operations and production errors. I truly believe that it's actually integrity. So maybe I highlighted the wrong answer. So let me actually go verify whether or not I did highlight the wrong answer or if the actual answer was incorrect. So let me just go confirm that real quick. Okay, so see, verifying from my list of actual questions inside of my original document before I made that slideshow, the correct answer is integrity, right? So that was actually my bad for highlighting confidentiality, which is the wrong answer. The actual answer is integrity. Manufacturing company suffered an attack where the control system was altered, leading to incorrect machine operations. So the answer is integrity. So we were right. I just made an incorrect choice. I made the wrong, I selected the wrong option and I bolded the wrong option. So in this particular case, so let's go back to our little slideshow here and let's fix this to make sure that when you get this document, when you become a member of Hackaholics Anonymous and you get these cheat sheets and these practice questions, you have the right answer here. So integrity is the right answer for the manufacturing company. And that's actually the last question before we get into the authentication and authorization practice questions, which means we are officially done with this particular segment of the training series. So based on what requests that I got from some of the people inside of the community, what I'm going to do with this particular training series is that I'm going to separate these videos in smaller chunks. So we have technically chapter 1A of Security Plus that we just wrapped, including all of the practice questions, and that's it for this one. So the next video that is going to come up will be the video for section 1B of Security Plus, and you will get access to that as well. I will most likely split these. I'm going to try to experiment with a different type of publishing, so maybe we'll upload the entire video for chapter 1, which will probably end up being several hours, like 5, 6, 7 hours maybe, or I will upload them one at a time. I guess we'll find out. I guess we'll find out at the end of this whole thing when the uploads do take place. And as you're watching this, maybe you're gonna watch this and the video is gonna end, or maybe you're gonna watch this and then it's just gonna move directly on to the very next segment. In either case, I do want to let you know that you can get access to this document through the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. which basically means you just go to the channel, you click on the join that's on the homepage of the channel, and from there you choose the agent's tier level of membership, and then you go through the rest of the checkout process, and then you'll get access to our agents community. And once you do that, then when you join our community, you will see inside of the community tab, I will distribute this regularly. I check for new members all the time. So when I notice that new members are coming in, I'll send out another link, and then you'll get access to all of the links that will point you to the download pages for the practice questions and the notes document for the Security Plus course. So I hope to see you inside of the Hackaholics Anonymous community, and I hope that you got value from this chapter of this video. So we're going to go into chapter 1B. This Security Plus training series is sponsored by Hackaholics Anonymous, which is the premier YouTube community for security professionals and hackers. And to get access to the training documents for Security Plus, as well as all of the practice questions inside of that slideshow, as well as the mock examination links that are available in the documents, you would join Hackaholics Anonymous as either a cyber agent, cyber guardian, or a cyber master. And if you join as any one of those tiers, you get exclusive downloads, which includes all of these Security Plus training documents and mock exams, so on and so forth. But you would also get Python automations for system administration, cybersecurity, pen testing. You would get access to live streams that go on monthly with me, Discord servers for advanced members, exclusive downloads, exclusive content, and of course a myriad of other things as well. And it would be my pleasure to actually see you inside of Hackaholics Anonymous. And to be able to join, you would need to simply just click the link in the description below. You can also come to our homepage on the channel and just click on this simple little join button that we have over here, or you can go to youtube.com/HankHacksHackers/join, and that would give you access to that little pop-up that you just saw, which shows you all of the different tiers of Hackaholics Anonymous. All right, now we need to talk about authentication and authorization. And these are concepts that ensure security of systems and data, and authentication refers to verifying who somebody actually is, so the identity of a user or the identity of a system. And authorization talks about giving them access. So are you authorized to do whatever it is that you're trying to do as this person that you have been authenticated as, right? So that's basically it. So if you can think about it, who are you, and then do you have permission to do that? Do you have the permissions to do the things that you're trying to do? So when you are looking at this from the perspective of a security analyst, and you're trying to implement authentication and authorization mechanisms, you have to make sure that you do this as best as you can and as correctly as you can to prevent unauthorized access, data breaches, or any kind of malicious activity. And then, tying this back to the target example that we went through, that was a version of authentication and authorization that was misconfigured. It wasn't configured properly. So the person who was from the HVAC company, that ultimately their user name and password that was used, their credentials that was used to get into the target systems, they should not have had access, right? They should not have had access to be able to do the things that user account ultimately ended up doing, which ended up finally being inside of the POS systems. All of that stuff falls under authorization. So, you can authenticate the person, that part's fine, right? So their username and password working, that's fine. But should that specific user account have had the permission, right? The authorization to do all of the things that it ended up doing that ultimately cost Target over $200 million? And the answer to that is no. Right. So what we're going to talk about is the various authentication methods, like, for example, MFA, multi-factor authentication, as well as authorization protocols that help you define and enforce what we call access control. So that is the purpose of this section that we are in right now. So let's talk about authentication. The authentication process is basically verifying the identity of a user or the identity of a system or any kind of entity that is attempting to access something. So first you need to verify their identity, right? And passwords are the most basic version of authentication. So you have your username, you have your email, and then there's going to be a password that is always associated with that username or email. And then there is PIN numbers, or answers to security questions. And these are typically still falling under the first level of authentication, which is something that you know. And then when we get into multi-factor authentication, then you have to have something else that would be a second factor, at the very least, a second factor of authentication. That's also known as 2FA, so two-factor authentication. But then when you get into multi-factor, that means you need to have, let's say, one of these things. So you have a password or a PIN, and then you need to also have some kind of a security token or a smart card, or maybe your mobile device should be handy because we're going to send you a secret code to your mobile device, and then you need to have that, right? You need to have the mobile device. And then the third thing is something that you are. So think about if you have an Android, typically they look at your fingerprint as your biometric scan. If you have iPhone, they look at your face scan, so facial recognition, and that would be what you are. So if that doesn't work, if any of these things are technically missing, then you won't be able to authenticate yourself, right? So this is what authentication methods or multi-factor authentication methods really goes into. Is ideally, in a perfect world, you have one of these things, something that you know, something that you have on you, so it could be a security card or it could be your mobile device, and then something that you are, which would be your biometric scan. So facial recognition, retinal scans would be for your eyes, right? So if you're trying to get into a building, you've probably seen this on a lot of like spy kind of movies where they, put their eye into the scanner and it scans their retinal scan. So any of these things would fall under the something that you are category. So there are a lot of these things that are very common these days. So your username and password is the most common. And so if you go in to log into a website and you say, remember me, then what it's going to do is it's going to graduate from asking for your password every single time, and it's going to start granting security tokens and cookies and caches that the web browser is going to use to remember who you are, so that the next time that you try to access it, it won't ask for your username and password anymore. And then when we get into single sign-on, that's also one of these things where it goes into security tokens and ticket granting systems and so on and so forth, where it alleviates you from having to re-enter your username and password every single time, and it goes into the next level of authentication. Then you have biometric systems, so for example, fingerprint scanners, Face ID, so on and so forth. And then we have hardware tokens or authenticator apps, which are another one of those things that connects to something that you have, right? So the authenticator app, so Google Authenticator, for example, is something that you download onto your phone, and then it resets every like 15 or 20 seconds, and it generates a new code. And then so if you have anything connected to your authenticator app, then for logging in, the next time that you try to log in, it's going to say, hey, give me the code from your authenticator. And that code is constantly resetting just in case somebody, for whatever reason, captures that code that you input into the system. It won't be the same code next time, right? So that is one. These are actually the most common versions of authentication these days. And then it's going to probably get more and more advanced, and you can now put a key inside of a USB drive or a USB thumb drive, and that ends up becoming your physical key to get access to a computer device now, or something like that. So that's the next level of authentication that I think is going to start becoming even more common as we go further along into the digital realm. The threats that we have to our authentication attacks these are also very, very common. So brute force attacks, meaning brute forcing, you're just trying to try as many different guesses for a login as you possibly can. Now, this is typically kind of protected against. It's mitigated by doing a limited number of login attempts before the account gets locked. So for the most part, brute force attacks have been taken care of in most environments, so you really don't have to worry about it as much. However, a phishing attack, so it falls under social engineering, which is hacking the human being, and that is specifically more prominent now than ever before, because now you can use AI software to take a picture of somebody and then turn that picture into a video that is now deceptive. So somebody sends a video over, saying, from the CEO. There was like a really good example where they used these AI face emulators and deep fake software, and they hit up this one banker. pretending to be the banker's CEO, and they used the picture of the CEO to generate this video, and the video was requesting the transfer of funds, and all of that was hacking that specific banker as a human being by using deceptive, not just emails, it was a combination of emails and everything else, but it was also a deceptive video that really drove that hack home. And that person was like, oh, okay, I'm talking to my CEO, and my CEO is requesting that I transfer funds, so on and so forth. And he did it, of course, and it was a very large sum of money, and they weren't able to recover the money because it was gone. By the time that they found out that it was a hack, the money was gone and they couldn't track it back. So replay attacks is another one of those things that is very common these days, which is using stolen credentials to impersonate somebody. And you can do this by doing a man-in-the-middle attack that we talked about earlier, where you essentially capture and sniff somebody's traffic, and then within that traffic that you are sniffing and capturing all of those packets and frames and sessions, you are getting these stolen credentials from the intercepted traffic, and then from there you're replaying, meaning you just essentially use those stolen credentials to do a similar activity that that person was trying to do, and then now you're just redirecting that activity to your own bank account or to your own server, so on and so forth. So you're using legitimate credentials that you stole. Instead of trying to guess them, you're now using legitimate credentials to replay the attack that you have, and then just act as if you are that person. Which brings us to the concept of authorization. So we've authenticated somebody, and now we need to make sure that they have only the authorization that they actually need to do the job that has been assigned to them and nothing more. So this is the process of determining whether a user, once they've been authenticated, has the permission to access a specific resource or perform any given action and nothing more, right? So this is the most limited amount of trust that we're giving to this person, and we're going to go over the concept of zero trust in a little bit as well. So the example scenario would be a user successfully logs into an application, so they've authenticated themselves, and now the system checks whether the user has the appropriate role or permissions to access the files or features that they are trying to access. So the system will do this behind the scenes based on what the security administrator and the security engineers have established for this group of employees or for any given role that has been authenticated, right? So once you have authenticated yourself, immediately the system is going to run a number of checks that's going to say, okay, you can go to this place, you can go to this place, you can access these files, you can't go to the control panel, you can't access certain features or certain functions inside of the command line, so on and so forth. So that is done behind the scenes, and if a person tries to do something that they don't have permission to do, then immediately they're going to get notified from the system, and they're going to learn that they can't do that, right? So the system will immediately just say, you don't have permission to access this specific resource. So we have a few authorization models, and these are the most common, right? So there are other types of authentication models or authorization models, excuse me, but these are the most common that we're going to deal with in a lot of environments. One of them is the role-based access control, which assigns permissions based on the role of the person. So if you're a guest, you obviously have the most limited type of access control. If you're a regular user, you probably have a few other access controls or a few other permissions that a guest does not have. And then if you're an admin, most likely you have the highest level of permission inside of that given environment. And then there is the root administrator or the domain administrator that usually has even higher access than a regular admin. So think about the branch manager of a bank. Technically, they are an admin of that specific location, and they can reset the teller's password, right? So that is technically an administrator privilege that they can do, but they can't log into the Active Directory root domain or the domain controller account and navigate across the entire bank's database and all of their assets and all of the users and do what they want willy-nilly, right? So they are still limited. So the highest level would be the domain administrator or the domain controller, and then from there it trickles down and privileges are removed for every level that is lower than that specific level. And then we have the attribute-based access control, which grants access based on the user's attributes. So for example, what department or group of employees are they in, what location are they in. And then there's something called rule-based access control, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And this is the best way that I can display something for you in one shot. So as I mentioned at the very top of this, authentication is the process of asking the question, who are you, right? And we can do this in a variety of different ways that we already saw. And authorization is, are you allowed to do that? So who are you, and do you have permission to do the things that you're trying to do? That's basically the simplest version of looking at authentication and authorization, which brings us to the concept of multi-factor authentication. So we've touched on this a little bit. We're just going to go look at it a little bit further in the actual process of multi-factor authentication. So MFA is the security mechanism that requires users to verify their identity using 2 or more factors from different categories. So as a review, we have the something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are categories. So something that you know would be your password or your PIN number. Something that you have would be a hardware token. It would be your smartphone. It would be a one-time password that would be sent to your smartphone, for example. And then something that you are would be biometrics, like your fingerprint, voice recognition, facial scan, anything of the sort, right? So it will require at least 2 or more factors from different categories. And the more secure the system is, then it will require more factors. And the more sensitive the information, or the more sensitive the resource, then it will require more factors of authentication. So MFA works like this. You have your password and your username that you enter. That's the first step. Once you've entered your username and password, then you have to provide a second form of authentication. So for example, sending the one-time password to your phone or to your email, and then getting that one-time password entered into the very next form. And then from there, scanning your fingerprint would be probably another one, or it could just be the alternative of this specific one, where instead of doing the one-time password, they'll scan their fingerprint, or they'll scan their retina or facial scan or something like that. But at the very least, you have your username and password, and then typically some kind of a one-time password that's sent to your email address or your phone. Now, for me personally, if somebody has access to my computer and they have access to my web browser, most likely that means they also have access to my email address as well. So my one-time password is always sent to my cell phone because that's on me. And even if they somehow manage to hack my phone number and intercept my text messages, at the very least, I also get a text message, and immediately I'm notified, and I'm like, well, I never requested a one-time password. And so then I go and immediately change my passwords and make sure everything's all good. And then there's the other one that I have the Google Authenticator app as well. So that's also installed on my phone. And that's another thing where if somebody's trying to do something, at the very least, they would have to take that extra step, which has become even more difficult these days because Apple and Google and Android and all these guys are doing the best that they can to secure cell phones and secure phone numbers. And then they have to go through your phone service provider, and they have to go through so many other levels or barriers of entry to get access to your phone than they would have to do just to your computer, right? So if they have access to your computer for one way or another, for one reason or another, if they were able to do that, the next thing would be to get access to your phone, which is much more difficult, especially if you're not on site and if you're not connected to the Wi-Fi network of wherever the computer is connected to. And then if you really want to just go above and beyond, then you put a key on a physical USB thumb drive that is required for somebody to log into your computer. And Microsoft does this now. And a lot of service providers, a lot of operating systems now have this as an option. And it's as simple as, okay, I want to set up this key. Okay, insert your thumb drive. You insert the thumb drive. And then it's like, all right, so here we go. We're going to put this key on the thumb drive. And that thumb drive is no longer being used for anything else. The only thing that it serves is the purpose of that key, which means you can literally get like a 1 gigabyte or like a super small thumb drive so that there's nothing else that can be stored on it. And then you just have this one little file that is the key. And then that key ends up being your physical authentication method that you would plug into your computer to verify who you are. And I would say that's probably the highest level of security that a regular consumer can take outside of the enterprise environment or the business environment. So the benefits of doing this is that it drastically reduces the likelihood of unauthorized access, even if the passwords are compromised. And it adds layers of security, making it harder for attackers to bypass defenses. So, for example, they would have to get access to your phone. They would have to get access to that physical thumb drive and make a copy of that key. It just makes it much, much more difficult for them to be able to hack into your system or your accounts. Now, some of the more common MFA implementations would be sending an SMS or email one-time password. And as I already talked about it, I always have it sent SMS because typically if they have access to my computer, they may also have access to my web browser, which means that my web browser is most likely, because I've chosen it to remember who I am, so they'll probably remember, they'll be able to get access to my email unless I use like an email account that has not been saved, which is another kind of safeguard that you can have, is that there's one specific email that you use for all of your one-time passwords, and that email account has not been saved into any of your browsers. So every single time that you use it, you would have to enter your username and password. So that would be one version of MFA. We have another one, which is the Authenticator app. So like Google Authenticator or Authy, that generate time-based one-time passwords, which are very, very, that's another great way of generating this whole thing and creating an MFA for yourself, because they are time-based and they expire every like 20 seconds or something like that. You have hardware tokens, so physical devices like the UB keys that generate codes or provide direct authentication, or just putting a key on a USB drive, for example. That's another way of doing it. UB keys are specific to this purpose, but you can just do it on a regular thumb drive as well. And then, of course, there's biometrics. So fingerprints, facial recognition, retinal scans, things like that. That's all under the concept of MFA. So in a perfect world, you will have multiple versions of this, right? So you'll have your username and password, and then they're going to say, go get the authenticator code. And then to be able to get to the authenticator code, your phone has to do a facial recognition of you to allow you to get into the phone. Or, you would have to enter your password to enter into the phone and then get into the phone. And then you get your one-time password from the authenticator, and then you go and you enter it into the website or the service that you're trying to use. So you can see how these things, and it happens in a matter of 10-20 seconds. So it's not a long process, but it carries a lot of weight when it comes down to security controls and authentication methods. The limitations are the phishing resistant MFA. So FIDO2 keys is an example of this. And it's necessary for optimal protection, as attackers can bypass weaker methods like SMS-based one-time passwords. So they can actually get your SMS, right? So SMS is the simple messaging service or system that is sending text messages, and it is possible to intercept your text messages. So let's be clear about that. It's not that it's impossible to do. It's just it's an extra annoying layer of protection that is more annoying than sending it to your email. If the person is already in your computer, they can most likely get into your email. So doing an SMS based is stronger than an email one-time password. But then getting a FIDO2 key, for example, or getting the UB key is also an extra layer of protection that is stronger than the SMS-based one-time password. So these things are very, very important. So using the Authenticator app would mean that they no longer can get an SMS one-time password, right? So if you get the Authenticator app one-time password, it's very difficult for them to intercept that password, because if they're intercepting your SMS, that means they're only intercepting your text messages. So they will probably most likely not be able to access the Authenticator one-time password. So there are limitations to this, and there's always a way to make it even harder for an attacker to get into your account or to get into your devices. And you are studying security, so luck favors the paranoid in this world. So the more paranoid you are, it doesn't mean go crazy and be like lose sleep over it, but be paranoid in the sense that you have multiple layers of authentication for all of your most sensitive services. If it's something for watching videos or some crap like that, or like the unnecessary stuff that has no financial documents attached to it or no payment information or any of those things, don't really worry about them as much. But your bank account, yeah, you should have authentication methods that are attached to it. So there was a recent update that was done on iOS for Apple that if you're trying to open any application on your phone, you can request a face scan to be done, and on top of the actual face scan to get into the application itself. So for example, if I'm trying to log into my bank account, when I open up the bank account app, it'll ask for a face scan to actually enter my username and password into the bank account app. But now there's that extra layer of protection where I can actually do the face scan to even open the application. And then once the application is open, then there's another face scan to enter the username and password. So there's multiple layers of this. And again, it's just, luck favors the paranoid when it comes down to security. So just keep that in mind, right? In my opinion, there is no such thing as overkill when it comes down to security, especially on sensitive services or sensitive accounts. And here's our little visual. So we have the multi-factor authentication visual. So you have your password, and then you have some kind of verification that would be your extra verification, and then boom, you get access. So it's a simple one, but I like visuals. Visuals help me kind of drive the point home, so to speak, and really, really lock it in. So this is what it looks like. You put in your password, and then there's some kind of layer of authentication, and then you get access to whatever it is you are trying to access. Which brings us to access controls, right? So now we have role-based or rule-based access control, which all falls under the authorization category here. So we went through authentication, and now we need to understand what role-based versus rule-based access controls are. And of course, there's attribute-based access control, which we talked about at the top of this section. So we have the role-based access control, which is permissions based on predefined roles within the organization. So for example, the admin will have full access to all resources and settings, and you can have multiple types of admins, right? So there's the branch manager that technically is an administrator, and then there's underneath that there would be the supervisors or regular managers, so access to team related resources but restricted from system configuration. So the domain administrator has the highest level of access control, and they can do system configurations, right? They can get into the control panel and get into the registry and get into our Active Directory users and groups and group policies. They can do all of those things. But then the branch manager, which would technically be considered a level of administrator, or the manager themselves, they don't have access to get into Active Directory users, right? The only thing that they can do in Active Directory would be to reset the password of a user. Let's say somebody went on vacation, one of the tellers was on vacation, they came back, their password was expired, and so the branch manager can reset their password, and that's pretty much the only thing that that person should be able to do. They should not be able to configure anything else inside of the system or inside of Active Directory, get into the group policies, none of that stuff, right? So they have limited access, but they have a little bit more access than the user does. So they can do the team related access resources. The user has the lowest level of access, and it's only limited to that specific role in their personal department, so on and so forth. And this is just a few of the roles. If you were to go look at the full list of roles that exist inside of Active Directory, then you'll be, so actually this is actually a perfect time to do that. So let me just show you what the full list of roles in Active Directory look like. Okay, so here's what it looks like. So we have the first category of roles, which is the flexible single master. So you have the schema master, which controls changes to Active Directory schema, which is the blueprint for everything. Then you have the domain naming master. Then you have the relative ID master. Then you have the primary domain controller emulator. And then you have the infrastructure manager. And these guys fall under the highest level of controls and highest level of privileges and authorization. And then you have your user roles. So the regular users, the domain administrators, enterprise administrators, group policy administrators, help desk operators, account operators, server operators, backup operators, print operators, the readers, which can just read information. They can't do anything else. And then you have the other roles. So for example, administrators, users, and guests would be the groups that would be considered. And so a guest obviously would have a much lower level of authorization than an admin would. You have custom groups that you can create by administrators, service accounts that are just for services and applications, not any individual person, but an actual service or an application. And then we have, of course, role-based access control, what we just talked about, and then delegating control. So a domain admin can delegate the control of password resets inside of the branch to the branch manager. That's what that means. So instead of every single time that a user or a teller forgets their username and password, or at least their password, instead of hitting up the IT department and taking their time, they can just go to their branch manager, and the branch manager has been delegated the control of resetting their password. And this is like the list of users that or roles that are available inside of the Active Directory environment. So when you're thinking about role-based access control, this is kind of what it looks like. And these are all the different categories of roles, which means each one of these categories has their own sets of permissions and authorization that they can do inside of any given environment. In this particular case, we're talking about Active Directory, which means we're talking about the Microsoft environment. But it's also similar to a Mac OS environment or the Linux environment. There also is different levels of roles and different levels of permissions that can be assigned to various users. So the reasons why we would do this, some of the advantages here, are to simplify access management by grouping permissions. So if you create a group for all of the tellers, and essentially anytime a new teller comes in, you just drag and drop that user inside of that group, and now they have all of the permissions of that group and nothing more, right? So that's kind of the whole idea here, is that you create these various groups, which we can consider to be attributes. So you create a various group, and then when somebody comes in, you just add them to that group, right? And then a branch manager can have access to the tellers as well as the manager's group policy objects. So they'll be only in the group of the manager, because that's called an organizational unit, and I don't want to get too deep into that. So a user can only be a member of one organizational unit at a time, but they have access to a variety of group policies, which means that they have manager permissions as well as teller permissions, right? So that it simplifies a lot of these things by just creating these groups that you can assign permissions to, and now you just drag and drop somebody. It's so freaking easy. If you haven't seen the video already, go look at the Windows fundamentals and the Active Directory fundamentals that was recently launched on this channel, and then you'll see how easy it is to just group people together and assign permissions, and the drag and drop function, and how freaking simple it makes to manage users and groups and things like that. And then it reduces the risk of human error when assigning individual permissions. So again, if you've created a group and now you are hiring a new person inside of the IT department, and then you say, yeah, we have these, dozen users that just came in, and they all belong to these various levels of groups. So just go drag and drop them inside these groups so that they get the permissions that they need. And that's all the new intern has to worry about, is just dragging and dropping and making sure that the person is in the right group that they need to be, which hopefully, at the very least, they can handle that responsibility, right? So common use cases would be in the enterprise environment, obviously HR systems and cloud platforms. These are all types of environments that will benefit from role-based access control, which is, I would say, probably the most common version of access control. And here's the visual to this. So you have the system administrator, which is the highest level of administrator in this example, right? So we have the system administrator, and then these are the roles that they've created. So we have the beneficial owner, we have the accountants, and then we have the bookkeepers. And so there's one owner, 3 accountants, 5 bookkeepers. And then those roles are mapped to their permissions. So in this case, the beneficial owner has access to all of these permissions. Accountants has access to these permissions. Bookkeeper has only one permission right here. So if we looked at it, it says they have access to workplace settings, account analytics, and to move money. That's what the owner can do over here. The accountants can only look at account analytics and move money. They can't do anything with the workplace settings. The bookkeeper just attaches receipts. They can't move money. They can't look at account analytics. Obviously, they can't look at workplace settings. They simply has the ability to attach a receipt. And that's what the overview of role-based access control kind of looks like in one image. Then there's rule-based access control. So role-based and rule-based, in my opinion, should be implemented at the same time to have the highest level of security posture. So rule-based access control is permissions that are based on specific rules or policies that evaluate conditions. So for example, deny access to users from outside of the company's IP range. So if they're trying to access a specific website or a resource and they're not in the range of IP addresses that belongs to the company's network, meaning they're on a private Wi-Fi somewhere or they're in a public Wi-Fi somewhere, they're basically not in the IP range that they're supposed to be, they don't get access, right? That's a rule-based thing. Allow access to a server only during business hours. That's another rule, meaning if we are only operating in the Pacific Standard Time between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., if anybody tries to do anything outside of those times, then it's immediately denied. It could be inside of the company's IP range because let's say somebody got remote access to one of our computers, but now they're trying to do it outside of business hours because they don't want anybody who's on staff to be able to catch them and stop them in their tracks. So they're like, yeah, we'll do it outside of business hours. But then there's another rule that's in place that anything that's tried to be done outside of business hours, then we're going to block it, right? That's another rule that can be implemented to make sure that you have the highest level of security posture. The advantages would be that fine-grained control, right? So it becomes even more nuanced when you get into rules, and then you adapt dynamically based on the context or environmental factors. So for example, the location or the time or anything else. So like literally you can say, only this specific IP address inside of our company is allowed to do these series of tasks, and anybody, doesn't matter if it's a legitimate user, doesn't matter if it's during business hours, they could be inside of the company's IP range on the company's network. None of those things matter because there is this one IP address that is only allowed to do these specific tasks, and if anybody outside of this IP address tries to do it, immediately stop them in their tracks. So it becomes really, really nuanced, and you're talking about very, very detailed rules at this point, which is, I love these types of things. That means that you're really taking the best level of control that you can to try to control the environment. So the common use cases would be a firewall policy, right? A firewall can be very detailed. You can establish a lot of great rules to say that somebody can or cannot do something or get access to a resource based on the rules of the firewall. Network Access Control List, or ACL, is another way that we can do this. And of course, cloud security configurations would be another way that we can do this. So real quick, here's the visual. We have the rule-based access control, which is assigned by the administrator. They define the access criteria or the rules. And then there's the rule-based access control that dynamically assigns the roles to the users as well as the nuanced rules that have been assigned. So there's the roles of the users as well as the rules that have been established for the environment. And now all of those things are in place that will make it even more tight-knit of an environment. And then you have the comparison between these two, where we have the role-based is role-centric, whereas rule-based is condition-centric, and role-based is simpler to manage, while rule-based provides more flexibility for complex environments. So typically, the people who establish the rules are the system administrators and the security administrators because they know exactly the types of rules that they want to put in place. And it's just, I would say both are very, very important. It doesn't matter how big the company is. It doesn't matter how small the company is. I think any sized company can benefit from having both role-based and rule-based access control. Now, switching gears a little bit to try to make things a little bit more convenient for your employees and for the people inside of your environment, this is where single sign-on comes in. So let's say that single sign-on, assuming that, you have multi-factor authentication and all those things. So let's say that they put in their username and password, they got their one-time password sent to them, and they had their face scan or their fingerprint, right? So they've fully authenticated themselves. Once they have been fully authenticated, there's something called single sign-on that makes their life super easy. So it allows the users to authenticate once and then gain access to multiple applications or systems without needing to log in again. So imagine you've logged into your computer. So I log into my MacBook and I enter my MacBook password and I do my fingerprint, and I get access to my MacBook. Now I am logged in to my device, and based on my settings, I've said, hey, you know what? I don't want to re-log in to Adobe Premiere Pro, right? Every single time that I want to access Adobe, because you do need a license for Adobe. So I want to put in my password one time into my Adobe login, And then after that, every single time that I log into my computer and every single time that I open up Adobe Premiere Pro to edit some of these videos, I don't want to keep putting in that username and password. So if I authenticate myself one time by accessing my computer's authentication, then I should be able to get access to all of the applications that I have permitted to allow me to go into, right? So that could be one. Gmail would be another one, right? Logging into YouTube and looking at the analytics of the channel, that would be another one. There are so many different ways, so many different applications. Netflix, you want to log into Netflix and you want to watch Netflix. You don't want to keep logging in every single time. So these are different applications or systems that you can access by just doing that one sign-on, which would be to the computer. And that's basically it, right? That's the highest level of single sign-on. And in a lot of work environments, enterprise environments, Microsoft 365 is the thing that they use when they have Microsoft. And Microsoft 365 gives them access to Outlook, PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, so on and so forth. So getting that single sign-on into their Microsoft computer will now give them access to their email and Exchange and Outlook and like just give it in, right? Everything that's listed as far as the services that they would need on a daily basis. Now they don't have to re-log into those things every single time. They just log in that one time. So the user authenticates through a central identity provider, and then the identity provider generates a token or assertion that grants access to other systems or services. And this is the technical explanation for this, but that's basically saying exactly what I just said. So the benefits of SSO is enhancing user experience by reducing login fatigue, right? You just get exhausted by having to re-log in every single time. Improve security by centralizing credential management, which is another really great thing. So you don't have to manage each one of those credentials. You manage mainly one credential, and from there, because there is going to be a authentication through the identity provider, which generates tokens or assertions, then you only have to worry about managing that one login credential, and then from there, everything else would be attached through the identity provider. Simplified IDs simplifies IT support by reducing password reset requests, because again, it's just that one credential that needs to be managed and everything else is done through tokens or assertions. The common protocols here, we have SAML, which is the security assertion markup language that is typical to the Microsoft environment. And then you have OAuth or OpenID Connect, which would be used in other operating systems or other environments. And you can use them as third-party providers to do basically everything that is done by single sign-on or through single sign-on. So SAML is typically for Microsoft because they are doing this within their own operating system, which is why most enterprises prefer to use Microsoft, because it makes it very easy to manage a large number of employees and people inside of the company. And then for smaller companies or people who are not using Microsoft, you can go into OAuth or OpenID Connect. Now, there's an extension of single sign-on, which is federation. So imagine that a company has multiple branches in multiple states and maybe even multiple countries. So the person who is allowed to have permission in these different states. So for example, somebody in the C-suite level. So the CFO, for example, the CFO should be able to access essentially every domain inside of that organization. Doesn't matter where the location of it is. So federation extends those SSO privileges across different organizations or different domains. So let's say one parent company has bought multiple companies, and the CFO of the parent company should be able to get access to every asset inside of all of those organizations or the domains, which allows them to go from one domain to access resources in another domain without having to keep signing in, right? Or keep authenticating themselves. So this relies on the trust relationships between identity providers as well as service providers. And the trust relationship is something that we also talk about inside of the Active Directory foundational video that I did recently. So you can go find that, the fundamentals of Active Directory or Intro to Active Directory Basics. When you look at that, the trust relationship is something that's done inside of Active Directory as well as between identity providers and service providers. So there is a trust that's established between these guys, and once that trust has been established and it's been verified, then you don't have to keep logging in. So the example is to log into the partner company's portal using your corporate credentials, because they said that, hey, these credentials from this company on this domain name using this email address that's not our email address, that person can still log into our service. Now, a kind of like a hazard of this is what happened to Target from the Target example that we looked at, right? Their HVAC company was able to log into the Target system using their credentials, and that ended up being the Achilles heel that got Target screwed. The key components here is the trust framework in this case, which defines policies and agreements between those entities, between the federated entities. And then you have the identity broker, which mediates authentication requests across those systems. So again, if it's in a Microsoft environment, Microsoft Active Directory ends up being both of those things, where it's the trust framework as well as the identity broker. But if it's in other types of environments, usually you're using two separate services for this, but they would obviously be established services. So we'd have a verified identity provider that is really good, and then you have a verified service provider, and then they connect together to make sure that everything works smoothly. The benefits here, obviously, facilitating cross-organization and collaboration without duplicating identity systems, so you don't have to recreate usernames and passwords for the same person across different organizations or different domains. They can just use that one login to be able to access resources on all of the different domains. And it reduces the needs for users to manage multiple accounts. So that one's pretty much the benefit of single sign-on. So the federation version of single sign-on is something that's a little bit more amplified. It's not really that much more advanced. It's just more amplified, meaning that it allows a larger scope of access to that one person with that one login, and they're able to use different resources or access different assets across multiple organizations or multiple domains. And these are the most basic examples. So single sign-on would be logging into your Gmail account or your Google account, and then now you get access to YouTube, Gmail, Google Drive, and everything inside of Google Drive, right? So that's I feel like everybody can relate to this, because in one way or another, I think everybody has a Gmail account, and at the very least, they have a YouTube account. Even if they don't use Gmail and they use Yahoo, you still need a Gmail account to access YouTube. So that's one of those things that I would say is probably the most common. Everybody can connect to it or relate to it. And then we have Federation, which is the Microsoft 365 services that would be done using your school, right? So if you are a college student or university student, or you have corporate credentials, and then you use those 365 services via Azure Active Directory, which is basically everything that we've been talking about so far, right? So you use Active Directory to be able to get one login, and then from that one login, you get access to Microsoft 365 and essentially everything else that is inside of the Microsoft domain as a service. So here's the real world example here that happened to Facebook. So in 2018, there was a breach in Facebook, and it had to do with authentication and authorization, as we've been talking. So Facebook uses OAuth, and this is the industry standard protocol to allow users to grant third-party applications limited access to their data. So when you log into any service that's not a Facebook service and it says, hey, do you want to use your Facebook credentials to log in? That's basically one of those things. And same thing with when you want to log into any kind of company or new service and it says, hey, do you want us to just use your Gmail authentication to log in? That's basically what that is. So this system simplifies the login process and enhances user privacy by avoiding the need to share their Facebook password directly with the application, because again, they're using tokens and things like that. So the breach exploited a vulnerability in the View As feature, which allowed attackers to steal access tokens from a small subset of users. These access tokens could then be used to access the accounts of those users and potentially other accounts that are connected to them. This demonstrates the dangers of relying solely on access tokens for authorization and the importance of implementing robust access controls and token management strategies. The key takeaways here is that authentication and authorization are distinct, meaning they're separate, but they are interconnected concepts. So once a person has been authenticated, they get access to things. They have authorization to do certain things. So the authentication verifies the identity. Authorization determines what actions that user is permitted to perform. And if the authorization and rule-based access control, role-based access control, if those configurations are not done properly, then as soon as a person is authenticated, that means that they can get access to any of those assets that have been previously determined, which means a hacker can also do the same thing. They can authenticate themselves using my credentials or your credentials, and then now they get access to everything that we've established that we have access to. OAuth provides the convenient and secure method for third-party applications to access user data. However, it's crucial to implement properly security measures like token expiration, token revocation, and regularly doing security audits to mitigate the risks that are associated with access token usage. So if you have not, and by the way, there is a way that you can go into your Facebook account and look at all of the different sources that you've given access to using your Facebook account. And if you're not using any of those things anymore, remove all of those accounts that you have used Facebook to log into. So it's very, very important to do your own version of kind of house cleaning or housekeeping to make sure that the Facebook account only has access to certain services that you're regularly using and nothing more, and then vice versa, because Facebook is obviously constantly upgrading the security posture as well as their security infrastructure, but a third-party company that's much smaller that you at one point used Facebook to log into that company, they may not be holding themselves up to the same guidelines that Facebook is, and that somebody could go through that company and get access to your Facebook account, and once they're in your Facebook account, now they can get access to every other account that you've used Facebook to authenticate with. So this is very important to understand. If you're not using more, those services anymore, those websites anymore, remove them from your list of logged in accounts from Facebook. The consequences of a breach can be severe, including data loss, reputational damage, and financial loss, as we saw with Target, right? Target got sued. There was a class action lawsuit to over $200 million, so on and so forth. So organizations have to prioritize the security of their authentication and authorization systems to protect themselves and their users. It's very important. This example illustrates real-world implications of authentication and authorization vulnerabilities and emphasizes the need for strong security posture in this criteria. There is another video that you can use for independent studies, which is the identity and access management tutorial and identity management tutorial that is on this channel. So if you just go look for identity and access management, you'll be able to find it. Or if you have this document, then you can just click on this link and go and find it. And it's a really good tutorial to kind of further drive home the point of identity and access management and the different rules and the different ways that you can configure these types of management. And I think if you're serious about going into security, and if you're serious about being a system administrator, security administrator, you will go ahead and watch all of these independent studies videos that I recommend to you, because it will just expand on the knowledge that you have. Now, if you've been a part of this channel for the past year that we've been running and you've seen all of these things, I would say it's still a good idea to go and review these information so that you can kind of remind yourself of all of those concepts. So that being said, let us now go into our practice questions for section 1B. All right, so authentication and authorization practice questions. So first one, which of the following is an example of a biometric authentication? So is the password, one-time password, fingerprint scan, or a smart card? So if you remember, it's something that you know, something that you have, something that you are. So a password would be something that you know. A one-time password goes into something that you have because they're going to send it to your email or your phone, right? A smart card is another thing that you would have. Fingerprint is the only thing that you are. So fingerprint scan would fall under biometric, which is what you are. What is the primary purpose of authorization? Verifying the user's identity, ensuring users can access the resources they're entitled to, encrypting sensitive data during transmission, or tracking users' activity on a system. So authorization, right? Going back to what it actually is, authorization is permission, right? So what are you authorized to do? So if we're verifying somebody's identity, that's actually, we're authenticating them, right? So we are trying to figure out that's who they are. if we're encrypting sensitive data during transmission, that really has nothing to do with authorization either, right? It's more about data protection, right? Data loss prevention, so to speak. Then we have tracking the activity of a system or the user's activity on a system, and that could potentially be authorization, but we're not really looking at their access, right? So authorization is access. So ensuring that users can access the resources that they're entitled to would be what authorization is. Which of the following is not an example of multi-factor authentication? So using a PIN and password together. So you have two forms of authentication here. So these are both the things that you know, right? So technically it could be. So if I enter my password and it asks me for a PIN, that could be multi-factor authentication, but both of them fall under the category of something that you know. Using a password and a fingerprint scanner, now there we go. So a password is something that you know, fingerprint is something that you are, so that could definitely be multi-factor. Using a smart card and a retina scan could also actually be something that would be considered multi-factor authentication. So a smart card is something that you have, retina scan is something that you are. And then using a one-time password and a password. So password is something that you know, and one-time password is something that you have. So this is definitely multi-factor. This is definitely MFA. This is definitely MFA. So PIN and password together is not MFA, because both of those are something that you know, and they are not something that you have as well as something that you know, right? So what is the difference between role-based access control and rule-based access control? Role-based, so RBAC, role-based access control, is based on the predefined user's role, while rule-based access control is based on conditional policies. Sounds pretty good. RBAC focuses on environmental factors, while RUBAC uses static permissions. That's definitely not it, because rule-based access control, I don't think so. So role-based access control, number one, doesn't focus on environmental factors. That would actually be rule-based access control. Rule-based access control does not use static permissions. I believe they would be considered dynamic permissions. RUBAC, rule-based access control, is more user-friendly than RBAC. That is also not true, because it is more complex and it requires more skill set to actually establish the rules. So that's definitely not true. Role-based is definitely more user-friendly. And then we have role-based uses biometric authentication, while rule-based uses PIN codes, and that's irrelevant altogether. So that has nothing to do with authentication. We're talking about access control. So authentication has nothing to do with these things. We're just talking about the rules, right? We're talking about authorization in this particular case. So I would venture to say that it is A in this example, and it is A. So role-based access control is based on predefined rules, or roles, excuse me, while rules are based on conditional policies. So that sounds good. Which of the following best describes single sign-on, a system that enforces multiple authentication methods for each login attempt? Maybe that could potentially be it, and so here's another thing, right? So if you have to convince yourself, or if you have to try to find the way that an answer would be the answer, it's probably not the answer, and it's more often than not the obvious answer that ends up being the answer. So I have to kind of convince myself that, yeah, technically, I guess you can use multiple authentication methods for each login attempt, and then once you're logged in, then you have access to the rest of the system. That could potentially be it. A system that allows users to log in once and access multiple applications without re-entering credentials. That's the obvious answer, right? So this one, I have to convince myself this is obvious. The next one is a process that ensures users can only log in to one system at a time. Definitely not that. A technique for encrypting user credentials across systems. That's definitely not it either. So B would be my answer, and that is indeed the answer. So which of the following scenarios demonstrates federation? So if we remember, federation was the kind of the amplification of single sign-on, right? So it allows you to do single sign-on in multiple domains or organizations. So logging into multiple company services with the same username and password, that could technically be it. That would, although I think that's more actual definition of single sign-on. Logging into a third-party service using your company email credentials, that kind of could be it. That might be it. Although I would say that would also be something that is done with like what you did with Gmail accessing a service or Facebook accessing a service. Logging into a personal email account using single sign-on, that's definitely not it, because federation is, as we established, is more for the enterprise and business environment. So probably not it. Verifying your identity through a one-time password sent to your phone, and that is part of authentication. So I would say it's not C or D or C. I would say it could be logging into a third party using your company email and password, or logging into multiple company services with the same username. It's a toss up between these two. Um, I would say B. Yeah, okay, there we go. Federation involves using one identity to authenticate across different organizations. So a third-party service using your company email credentials would technically be considered federation, right? So into multiple company services with the same username and password, that would be considered single sign-on. So cool. What is the primary disadvantage of multi-factor authentication? A disadvantage of multi-factor authentication. So it can increase the risk of phishing attacks. It may be inconvenient for users to set up and use. It eliminates the need for strong passwords. It makes systems less secure by adding more complexity. I would say I think it can increase the risk of phishing attacks. That would be the disadvantage, because it's not inconvenient to set it up and use it. And it does not eliminate the need for a strong password. If anything, it actually enforces the need for a strong password, because now you're only using one username and password. Excuse me, I'm confusing it with single sign-on. So it's not inconvenient to set up and use. I would say that's one thing. It doesn't eliminate the need for a strong password, because you still want a strong password even though you have multiple factors of authentication. And it doesn't make a system less secure by adding more complexity. It makes it more secure by adding more complexity. So I would say it increases the risk of phishing attacks, but that's not the case. So it says it may be inconvenient for users to set up. So MFA adds significant security, but can create inconvenience for users, especially during the initial setup. Okay, fair enough. So I guess, you would, if you have to download the Google Authenticator and set that up to your device, or if you need to set up the first one-time password so that now you've connected your email and you verified your email, or you verified your phone number, it can be inconvenient to set up. But and it can technically, I guess, be also inconvenient to use it, because every time you're trying to log in, now you have to open up your phone and you have to go into the Google Authenticator app and try to get that code, so on and so forth. So I think that actually is the answer. It will not increase the risk of phishing. That actually makes even more sense now when we think about it, because phishing attacks would require that they get not just your username and password, but they also get access to your phone so that they can get the one-time password, or they get access to your physical key that would be on a USB drive. So I don't think it would increase the risk of phishing attacks. I think it actually decreases the risk of phishing attacks, but it can be inconvenient to set up. So yeah, that is the right answer. An employee logs into the company email system using their password and is then required to enter a one-time code sent to their phone number. What is the additional factor in this MFA process? So if they're being sent to their mobile phone, that's something that they have. So it's something that they know and something that they have. So possession would be the additional factor in this particular case, something that you possess, something that you have. An attacker obtains an employee's password and uses it to attempt logging into the corporate network. However, the login is denied because the attacker does not have the employee's smartphone to approve the MFA request. What security feature prevented unauthorized access? So this was the multi-factor authentication that prevented unauthorized access. Role-based access control has to do with the employee, and that's access. So we're talking about authorization. We're not talking about authentication. We're still inside of the authentication, right? So MFA request meaning multi-factor authentication. So we're still talking about authentication. Role-based access control has to do with authorization. Single sign-on is authentication as well as authorization, but this is not the situation that the person had to do, right? So they're still in the authentication process. And then federated identity is not the example in this case either, because that has to do with accessing different resources using your company's email address. So multi-factor authentication would be the answer. Very good. So a company grants access to its payroll system only to employees in the HR department, regardless of their specific job, title, or role. So which access control model is being used? It grants access to the payroll system only to employees in the HR department. So that's their role, regardless of their specific job title or role. So it would be, I think, an attribute. That's an attribute-based access control, but it's saying regardless of their job title or role. So only employees in the HR department. So it could be a rule technically that says only employees in the HR department, regardless of their specific job title or role. So if it's regardless of their role, then we can just remove role-based. Discretionary access control is nothing that we've discussed so far, and it has nothing to do with this particular case. And mandatory access control also has nothing to do with this particular case. And I'll explain what those mean in a little bit. Just to be able to get the response here, I would say it is a rule that has been established, but it says what is being used. So it says it's a HR department regardless of their job title or role. So regardless of their role, meaning that we're not considering the role. So I have to verify to see if this is actually even the right answer. I may have selected the wrong answer here. So let me go and confirm this real quick. Okay, so here's the question, and the answer is role-based access control. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. A company grants access to the payroll system only to employees in the HR department. So technically, that is a role-based access, regardless of their job title or role. So it is role-based because they are in the HR department. It is not a rule. So a rule would be, they can only do it from an IP address, or they can only do it during certain times or something like that. So I guess role-based would be the closest answer. Let's actually find out what discretionary and mandatory access control are, so you can know what those are as well for your reference. So discretionary access control is the type of access control where the owner of a resource, so a file or a folder or something like that, the owner of the resource has the discretion to decide who can access it and what level of access they're allowed to have. So essentially giving them control over who can view or modify their data. So discretionary access control is the type of access control that, for example, me as a regular user on my desktop has a file, and I don't want that file to be viewed by any of the other users, and that includes the domain admin, for example. So if I don't want anyone to be able to get access to that, then I have the discretion to decide who can access it and the level of access that they're allowed to have. That's what discretionary access control is. Now, mandatory access control is essentially the opposite. It's the model that restricts access to resources based on the sensitivity of the information and the clearance level of the user. This is typically what they use in government environments, for example, where you need to have top secret clearance to be able to access something like this, right? So they say that's above your clearance level. You may have heard that in a movie. That's kind of what it is. So it's non-discretionary. It means that the access is controlled by the system, not the user or the file owner. The system administrator manually defines the access rules, which are then strictly enforced by the operating system or the security kernel, and nobody, doesn't matter what role you have or whatever, if you don't have the clearance level to get access to that specific document or file or folder, then you cannot get access to that. So it's restricted, right? And you see this a lot in like movies about the army or government or spies or something like that, where information has been redacted, right? So when you hear this has been redacted, the data on this file has been redacted, that means the person who's viewing it does not have the authorization, the clearance level to view that information. It's not redacted to the people who are higher up, right? It's not redacted to the highest of that hierarchy. It's just redacted to the person who's currently trying to view it. So mandatory access control is the exact opposite of discretionary access control. Discretionary access control, I can go ahead and assign permissions to the files or folders that I have. Mandatory access control is only the people who have the authorization to even set up the access control. They're the ones that set it up, and then anybody who does not have the clearance level is not allowed to view it, and it's mandated. It's mandatory. It's mandated by the OS or the security kernel, whether or not you can or cannot view that document or information. So moving on to our next question here, it says a database system allows access to records only during working hours based on predefined rules set by the administrator. So this one, it has literally, whoops, I should not have double clicked that. It literally inside of the question, it has the actual answer for us. So it's based on predefined rules, and it's during working hours, so that's a rule. So we can definitely confidently say that this is a rule-based access control. A user logs into a corporate portal, and from there they can access email, file storage, and HR applications without having to re-enter their credentials for each service. So they are logged into the corporate portal, and from there they can access to email, file storage. So they have one login, and then from there they can access all these other services. So that would be considered a single sign-on. They've signed in once to one time, and then from there they can access email, file storage, and HR applications without having to re-enter their credentials. So they have signed on once. That is a single sign-on. And the company uses federated, federated, it's literally inside of the question here. So they use a federated identity system to allow its employees to access a partner's organization application without creating separate credentials. So they're getting access to a partner organization, so a second organization, without creating separate credentials. So even if the word federated was not here, even if this type of because this kind of is like a gimme. This question is very much giving you two different hints as to what the answer is. So let's say it said a company uses the type of identity system that allows its employees to access a partner organization without creating separate credentials. That would be a federation sign-on. So cross-organization authentication allows you to do that. That would be federation. And that's it for our 1B, which is authentication and authorization. So we are now going to move into cryptography, and then we'll come back here to get access to these practice questions, which, by the way, are available to people who are agent level members of Hackaholics Anonymous and above. So if you want the document, the slideshow that has all the practice questions as well as all the practice exams and everything, that's at the end of our right here, not script, at the end of our notes, at the end of our notes document, this very, very last portion that has all of these mock exams and everything like that. These are all available to you if you get access to this document. And to get access to this document, you would need to go and get yourself a membership to the Hackaholics Anonymous agent level members and above. And we discovered how to do that at the top of this, but if you don't know how to do that, you just go to the homepage, click on join. So the homepage of this channel, click on join, and then choose the cyber agent tier. And then if you do cyber agent, cyber guardian, or cyber master, any of those tiers will give you access to these exclusive documents, as well as the questions, as well as these practice exams, so on and so forth. So that being said, let's now jump into 1C, which is the section for cryptography. This Security Plus training series is sponsored by Hackaholics Anonymous, which is the premier YouTube community for security professionals and hackers. And to get access to the training documents for Security Plus, as well as all of the practice questions inside of that slideshow, as well as the mock examination links that are available in the documents, you would join Hackaholics Anonymous as either a cyber agent, cyber guardian, or a cyber master. And if you join as any one of those tiers, you get exclusive downloads, which includes all of these Security Plus training documents and mock exams, so on and so forth. But you would also get Python automations for system administration, cybersecurity, pen testing. You would get access to live streams that go on monthly with me, Discord servers for advanced members, exclusive downloads, exclusive content, and of course a myriad of other things as well. And it would be my pleasure to actually see you inside of Hackaholics Anonymous. And to be able to join, you would need to simply just click the link in the description below. You can also come to our homepage on the channel and just click on this simple little join button that we have over here, or you can go to youtube.com/hankhackshackers/join, and that would give you access to that little pop-up that you just saw, which shows you all of the different tiers of Hackaholics Anonymous. All right, cryptography is the science of securing information by transforming it into an unreadable format for unauthorized users while ensuring that authorized users can read it. And this applies to anything from passwords to documents to everything else in between. So the science of securing information by transforming the information into an unreadable format for anybody who's not authorized, while making sure that people who are authorized can still read it. It plays a central role in protecting data in transit, at rest, and in use. So these are the three different stages of data. In transit is that when you email somebody back, and the email is going from your mail server to their mail server, that is in transit. At rest, meaning it's just sitting on your computer. In use means you have the document open and you're actually using it. And so in all of those stages, cryptography is meant to secure that information by transforming it so that unauthorized people can't read it and then authorized people can read it. The main objectives are confidentiality, integrity. So we've already talked about these things. So these are part of the actual CIA triad. So it still applies to the information itself, right? So you're looking at information, you want to make sure that the information is only viewable by authorized parties. And then you want to maintain the integrity so it doesn't get altered during transmission or while it's in storage. And then you have authentication. So it verifies the identity of the communicating parties. And that can be done through just looking at your the cryptograph of your password, for example. So the encrypted version of your password should still be authenticated instead of just looking at the plain text value of it. So it verifies the identity of the communicating parties, which in this case would be user A and user B. And then you have the non-repudiation, meaning that the sender of the message can't deny that they sent it, right? So that's the piece right there that is actually a really big deal when it comes down to really just data in transit in general, or just incident response or forensics. So a person that sent it should not be able to deny the fact that they sent it. And then if they didn't send it, would they also need to verify it so that I was never the one that actually did send this and I was hacked or something happened where somebody got into my credentials, so on and so forth. So repudiation, meaning you can deny it, and then non-repudiation, meaning you can't deny it. So cryptography is designed to make it so airtight and so secure that the sender cannot repudiate. They can't deny that they were the ones that sent the information, right? So it meets the methods of cryptographic methods or cryptography includes encryption and decryption, hashing and unhashing or dehashing, and encoding and decoding. And each one of them serve different purposes, and we are going to talk about those purposes. So first we need to talk about encryption. Encryption comes in two general forms, two main forms. One of them is symmetric encryption, and then the other one is asymmetric encryption. And encryption is the process of converting plain text into ciphertext, and then that ciphertext needs to be deciphered, right? And the reason why we convert it is to prevent unauthorized access to that information. And then we have the two types of encryption. So we have symmetric encryption, and that uses the same key. So if you can think about symmetric using one key for both encryption and decryption. So symmetric uses one key. Keep this in mind, okay? This is like the big thing about the difference between symmetric and asymmetric. Symmetric uses one key. Asymmetric uses two keys. Very, very important to understand. Symmetric is faster and it's simpler compared to asymmetric. Why is it faster and simpler? Because it uses one key. Simpler, one key, right? So symmetric is one key. Because of that, it's faster and it's simpler. It requires secure key exchange to avoid interception. So because you're using the same key, you need to pass that key along securely. And then the common algorithms are the AES algorithm, the DES algorithm, and 3DES. So AES is the advanced encryption standard. You're going to run across this one more often than not. And then you have DES, which is the data encryption standard. And then the 3DES is the triple data encryption standard. So just think about ES, encryption standard, and then you have advanced, which is the first version, the most commonly used, and then you have the other ones. And then, of course, the use case. So encrypting large amounts of data, for example, database encryption. Because we're going to be encrypting a large amount of data, we can just use one simple key, which would be symmetric, and it's going to be faster because we need to encrypt a large amount of data. It's simpler because we need to encrypt a large amount of data, and we can pass that key on to the next person who's going to decrypt it more securely because we're dealing with a large amount of data. So symmetric encryption uses one key. It's faster and it's simpler. You have to transfer that same exact key securely. So you exchange that key securely to avoid any kind of interception. And then you have the common algorithms, and then of course the use case in this particular case. So these are the key elements of symmetric encryption. And this is our visual. So you have, again, symmetric encryption. You have one key right here, right? So the secret key is used to encrypt the data. So plain text is encrypted, now it turns into ciphertext. And then that same key is used to decrypt the data and then turn it back into plain text for somebody to be able to access it. There's a lot of PDF documents that are secured this way, that they essentially they encrypt it, they give a password to it so that you can decrypt it, and then they'll give the password to the end user, and then they're the ones that use that same exact key, same exact password to decrypt the PDF file so that you can get access to it. So that's actually one of the more common ways that we can consider to be symmetric encryption. There's one key, one password that's used, and that is used to encrypt it as well as decrypt it so that you can read the document. Asymmetric encryption uses two keys. So asymmetric uses two keys, a public key for encryption and a private key for decryption. It eliminates the need for a key exchange, so you no longer have to exchange that password or that key file. Slower, but more secure than symmetric and encryption because it has two keys, right? And the common algorithms would be the RSA, which is the Rivest-Shamir-Edelman. You're not meant to remember that. Just remember that RSA is one of the most common versions of asymmetric encryption. And then we have ECC, which is the elliptic curve cryptography. That's a freaking mouthful right there. And again, you don't need to remember it. You just need to remember that AES, DES, and 3DES, those are all symmetric. And then you have asymmetric, which is RSA, and then ECC. RSA, I just think about it as really secure algorithm. That's like the way that I've remembered it, but it actually stands for the names of the people that put it together. So Rivest, Shamir, Edelman, it's like a law firm, freaking. So common algorithm would be RSA and ECC. That's asymmetric. Asymmetric uses two keys. Because you're using two keys, you no longer need to exchange the key. One person has the private key, the other one has the public key that is used to encrypt it. And then it's slower, but it's more secure than symmetric. And a use case would be a website, like a web server. So the web server, a website that we're using, for example, Google Docs, right? We're on Google Docs right now. Google uses their public key to encrypt it, and the private key is used to decrypt it. That's one of the ways that I get access to this. For example, Netflix is another one, right? They encrypt their stuff using their key, and then the private key is what I use, meaning my username and password, and I use that to decrypt the data, meaning I only get access to the contents. And this can be done with anything, and mostly insurance companies or financial services companies, that they need to make sure that the data on their end is fully encrypted. And when we say it's a public key, if you go into any web browser, you click on this little lock button in the top left. Let me actually zoom in here so I can kind of show you what it is, right? So typically there's a lock button right here. Mine just has these like little icons right here. And then you can look at the information of the website. And then if I click on connection is secure, it opens this up and then it says the certificate is valid. And then we click on that and it actually opens their certificate. And this is the public key that we're talking about, right? So here it is, public key. This is what's been used to encrypt this page so that only me with my login credentials can access it. And all of this is viewable. You can actually go look at the public key of any website and see what it is that they're using to encrypt all of that data. And then the only way that it can be decrypted is for me to use my private key, which in this case would be my username and password, so that I can access this document. So that's what that looks like. And the most common version of this would be the websites, right? So if you're using HTTPS, which is on port 443, which is the secure version of a website, that is the most common use case for communication. And the other one is encryption of the email, right? So the email gets encrypted so that only the person that is on the other end is able to view it. and then they use their own username and password on their own email account to be able to access it. They're not going to get your username and password as the sender from your email account, right? So you have your own, they have theirs, and then Gmail uses their public key to encrypt that email while it's in transit, and then when it gets delivered to you, it's also encrypted while it's just sitting there. And then when you open it, it's also encrypted while you're using that email, and you decrypt all of it using your private key. So remember, Symmetric uses one key, the keys passed from one person to another. And it's faster because it's using one key. It's simpler because it's using one key. And then you have, the AES and DES, so on and so forth. And then Asymmetric uses two keys, right? So here's the visual for this. We have two keys here. So the public key is being used to encrypt the data, and then it turns into ciphertext, which is basically jumbled jargon. You can't read it. You have no idea what the hell this is. And then you use your private key, your secret key, to decrypt it, and then it turns back into plain text so that you can read it. So this is asymmetric. So look at this visual, kind of internalize this visual, right? This was one of the big things that I had because I have a little bit of dyslexia, so I had like a big problem trying to remember which one was the single key and which one is the secondary key. But so symmetric, one key. Asymmetric, two keys. Symmetric, simpler. Asymmetric, not so simple. Symmetric, faster. Asymmetric, slower. So keep it in mind, right? And so symmetric, because it's simpler and because it's faster and you only need to use one key, you use it to encrypt large content, large files, which would be a database, for example. Asymmetric, it's used to transfer a web page to somebody so they can view it, or you use it to send email to somebody. So small files, right? Symmetric, large files, faster, one key. Asymmetric, smaller files, not that fast, and uses two keys. Keep that in mind. That's like the big differences that you need to know for the examination, or just in general when you interact with different types of encryption. That's what you need to understand. Okay. All right, moving on. This is a quick little comparison table for you, actually. So we have the symmetric and asymmetric, and then so symmetric has the same key for both parties. Asymmetric has two keys, public and private keys. Speed on symmetric is faster. Asymmetric is slower. Security on symmetric relies on the key being secured. So this key needs to be secured. The asymmetric security relies on the computational complexity, which essentially means the encryption complexity and the ability for the sender or for the server, so to speak, to secure it with their public key, and then for you to be able to decrypt it with your private key. So it's more relying on the computational complexity versus symmetric just relies on the key being secure. So nobody gets the password to the web server or the data server or the document. So AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, and DES and 3DES, which is the Data Encryption Standard and Triple Data Encryption Standard. And then we have RSA, which, that those three series of guys. And then you have ECC. So these are the different examples of these encryptions. And again, it's kind of just nice to have the side-by-side comparison here so you can really get it embedded into your brain. We do need to look at these algorithms a little bit closer so you kind of have an understanding of their use cases and what the possibilities are with them. So when you use these algorithms, they serve for different purposes, right? So we have the AES. So this is a symmetric algorithm, right? So AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, a symmetric encryption algorithm. The key lengths could be 128-bit, 192-bit, or 256 bits. And then we'll kind of explain what that means a little bit. But essentially, it's the length of the key itself. So if it's 256 bits, it's a longer key and harder to decrypt than the 128-bit, right? So 128 bits is obviously a half of the size of this one, so meaning it's a shorter key. Basically, that's it. Like the alphanumeric characters that you see, it's a shorter string of keys or shorter string of characters than the 256, which is a much longer string of characters. So think about it as having, for example, a 10 character password versus having a 20 character password. So if you have a 20 character password, obviously it's a little bit more complex to decrypt for somebody to hack into, so on and so forth. So it's known for speed and efficiency, which is AES, because it is symmetric. So we talked about this already. And it's used for VPNs, which is virtual private networks, and wireless security and disk encryption. So these are the common use cases for AES. It's used for VPNs, virtual private networks, wireless security, and disk encryption. And then we have the Rivest Shamir Edelman, the RSA key. And this is an asymmetric encryption algorithm based on the difficulty of factoring large prime numbers. And then it's often used for secure key exchanges, digital signatures, and email encryption. Because this is, again, a little bit slower, it requires two different keys, the public and private key, and it's relying on the complexity of difficulty of factoring large prime numbers. This is it's one of those like nuanced details that if you by any chance get the question says what algorithm is based on the difficulty of factoring, just keep that in mind, difficulty of factoring. And then this one is just, you just want to make sure that that key is transferred correctly to the other person, right? So this is the key difference between these two, the main difference between these two. This one, because it's asymmetric, requires two keys. The difficulty of the computation, the difficulty of the factoring is what is relied upon for its security. This one, you just want to make sure that the key itself, the password itself, is actually sent correctly and securely so that nobody has intercepted that key or that password. RSA is often used for secure key exchanges, digital signatures, and email encryption. So if we keep this in mind, we can actually think about the combination of these, right? So this is required for us to, the main security in this piece right here is to securely transfer the key. And then the main purpose for this is to actually securely transfer keys. So if you're trying to send a key, if you're trying to send a symmetric key to somebody, which again could be a password, right? Or a document or anything like that. If you're trying to securely transfer this, you would use this. So you would use an asymmetric encryption to securely transfer a symmetric key. Does that make sense? I hope that kind of lands at home for you. So that is the difference between AES and RSA. And then of course we have finally the SHA-256, which is the hash algorithm that is most commonly used. And again, if we go back to our example of the Google certificate here, you can see right here that they have a SHA-256 fingerprint. So these are the hash values, excuse me. These are the hash values of the Google certificate for securing their website, as well as the public key for securing this transaction that I'm having with Google Documents, right? So this is not the actual public key. This is just the SHA-256 fingerprint of the public key, because you don't want the public key to be noticeable still. You still want that to be hashed out so that it provides an extra layer of security. But for the most part, that's what it's like. So everything is hashed. For the most part, everything is hashed. And we did talk about this earlier, so I actually want to show you what the difference of hash values are when you make random changes. So let me just kind of show you what that's like. So MD5 is actually one of the most basic hash values or the hash algorithms. So this is no longer being used. For most cases, you're not going to run across the MD5 hash generator or hash values in general, because the SHA-256 is one of the most secure versions of it. So for the most part, you're not going to run across MD5 hash values. However, for the intensive purposes of just showing you what it's like, we're going to use MD5 hash generator because it's free and it's online, and we can real quick demonstrate this. So here's what it looks like. So let's say this is the string, right? So whatever, I just did that, and then we'll generate this, right? So now we have the two different hash values. You have, this is the string, and then the MD5 hash ends in 9043 and starts with 26 da 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 da. So this is the SHA-1, and so SHA-1 started first, and then it went up more and more, 128, 256, so on and so forth. So this is what we got, right? So this is the hash value of this particular string. So I'm just going to use the last portion of this, which is the 4903. That's going to be how I'm going to measure this. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm just going to change this, and I'm just going to remove that 9, and now that's my string. So I'm going to generate this, and we have this is the string, and it's complete. It was like 4903 or whatever, and now we have B234. That ends up being the hash value. So just one little change ends up completely changing the hash value. So we can do this again. So now I'm going to add a dot at the end of this, right? And then I'm going to click generate. And then this is again going to change. So CC6D5 is now the ending, and then the beginning of it is completely changed as well. So now the hash value has changed again completely by me just adding a dot to the end of it. So the entire hash value changed by me just adding a simple dot to the end of the string. And now I can go over here and I'll keep the G. I'm just going to turn it into a capital G, and I'm going to generate another hash value. And now it changed again, right? So E1, EC, and then the beginning, instead of you starting with A1, whatever it was, now the whole hash value has changed. So this is the power of hash values. Now, the thing with hash values is that they cannot be decrypted. Hash values can only be decoded or dehashed based on what is called a rainbow table. So let's say this is my password, right? And then the equivalent of this password, for example, is like this is the hash that is the equivalent of that password. In order for me to be able to find out what the plain text is, I need to actually have this hash stored in my table of hashes, and I need to know what the opposite of this is. So for example, another good version of this would be to go into CrackStation, which is one of the biggest rainbow tables. So this is a password hash cracker technically, but it won't work if you don't have like if the hash value that I'm searching for is not inside of their rainbow table. So let's go and actually look at this. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go back to my hash generator. And so inside of my hash generator, I'm going to type in the word password, right? So that's going to be the password. Very, very simple, very basic password, really insecure, right? And I'm going to take any of these hashes. So let's just take the SHA-1 hash. So we're going to take the SHA-1 hash. We're going to go to CrackStation and we're going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to crack this hash. Now, because of the fact that that password is so simple, obviously it is stored inside of their rainbow table. It's stored inside of their database. And then we can go here and, you know, they have NTLM hashes, MD2, MD4, MD5. They even have SHA-256 hashes. But it only works if the password is actually simple enough that it's inside of their rainbow table. And this is what it is. Their word list is what they're talking about. So if that word list contains the password that you're referring to, then most likely that hash value will also exist on that table, which means that they can find the plain text version of it. So let's do this with a complex password. So I'm just going to do this is a complex pass, and then we'll do password, and then we'll do all of these at the end of it. So super complex password, obviously. We're going to generate this, go here, and then for this, we're going to take the SHA-1, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm willing to bet money that they don't have the plain text value of this. So we're going to do that, and we're going to crash it, or crack the hash, and there we go. Not found, unknown type, because again, it's technically a SHA-1 hash because I literally only generated a SHA-1 hash. But that hash value, this specific plaintext value, does not exist in their rainbow table. It doesn't exist in their database. Therefore, they cannot crack it. And that's the very, very big piece about hash values. They can't be cracked. They can only be compared against an existing database. And if that database somehow has this in here, then it can be cracked. So we'll do one last one. So PASSWRD, for sure that is not a complex password because I'm sure somebody else has already had it. So we're going to take this hash value, we're going to go here, and then we'll paste it into CrackStation, and then we will crack it. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, see, it already exists because this is not a complex password. You might want to think that it is, but any type of variation of the word password exists inside of their database. I guarantee it. So there you go. That's what it's like. So it can only work if the plain text value already exists inside of their database, and then they're just going to compare this hash value against what is already inside of the database. Apart from that, they cannot just decrypt this just by looking at it and, oh, we're going to use some kind of like really crazy password tool to decrypt it. No, that's not how it works. Hash values are not meant to work that way. They only work if you actually have the hash value and the plain text value stored in your database. So here's the actual comparison here. So we have hashing versus encryption versus encoding. They may be used interchangeably, but they actually have very distinct purposes and applications and differences. So hashing converts the data into a fixed length hash value, as you already saw, There's a one-way function, so you can't reverse a hash to its original value. You can only, so now we're actually going to compare these three things. So hashing versus encryption versus encoding. So they may be used interchangeably. So you can technically say that a hash is an encryption. Technically, I guess you can say that. But they actually have different purposes, and they can be dealt with in different ways. So for example, a hash value, as we already saw, it converts the data into a fixed length hash value, which is essentially alphanumeric and other characters, so on and so forth, but it's a fixed length based on the algorithm. So SHA-256 is much longer than SHA-1, for example. But what it does is that it converts that data into that fixed value. There's only a one-way function, meaning that you can't reverse it to its original value. You can only compare it to your data set and see if you actually have that exact hash in your data set. And if you do, then you see, okay, what's the plain text counterpart of this? And then that's how you get access to it. But you can't reverse the hash to its original value. That's not possible. It ensures integrity by detecting changes in the data. So we saw that, right? The checksum value is what we were generating. So by adding a period or by changing one letter to a capitalized character, we are changing the entire hash value. And they use this hashing specifically a lot inside of chain of custody and forensic analysis and investigations, because if the disk image, so I get a copy of a computer's disk, I want to check it for any kind of data, and before I do anything, once I have that copy, I generate a hash value for it. If it goes from me to the next person that's handling that evidence, and between me and him, that hash value has changed, that means somebody tampered with that disk image. And that's very important to understand. So any kind of change will be reflected inside of the actual hash value, which means that we're now guaranteeing the integrity of the data by making sure the hash values are exactly the same as we go along through chain of custody and dealing with various types of information. We have the common algorithm, so we have the MD5, and it started at 2, 3, 4, and it got to 5, and then there was SHA-1, SHA-128, 256, so on and so forth, and then you have SHA-3, etc., etc. So if we go to CrackStation, we can see a good amount of variations for this. So NTLM is actually a hashing algorithm. LM is a hashing algorithm. These are specifically reserved for Windows and Microsoft environments. Then you have MD245 and an MD5 hexadecimal and an MD5 half. Then you have SHA-1, 224, 256, 384, 512. Obviously 512 is a much more complex version than SHA-1, right? Then you have RIPE-MD, Whirlpool, MySQL. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different hash values that exist. So there's a lot of different hash algorithms, that exist. And that's something that you need to keep in mind as well. So there's a lot of different hashing algorithms. They cannot be reversed. So this is the big thing to think about, okay? You can't reverse it. You can only compare it against a database that may potentially have it, and then it'll show you what the plain text version is. Then we have encryption. So encryption converts the plain text into ciphertext using an encryption key, and then it can be decrypted. So it is reversible. So you can decrypt something using that key. So it can decrypt. Decryption converts that ciphertext back into plain text using the key, right? It ensures confidentiality of data in transit or in storage. And the examples would be encrypting files before sending them over a network. So this is a very, very important thing to understand. Storing hashed passwords in a database is very different than encrypting files before sending them over a network or encrypting them before storing them. So encryption can be decrypted. Storing hashed values in my database of the passwords that are inside of my organization, if the password is a complex password and it doesn't exist on any downloadable password list. So for example, the RockU password list has something like 120 million passwords in it. So as long as your password doesn't exist in that list, most likely we can't decrypt it or decode it, right? We can't reverse that hash to its original value. However, encryption can be decrypted if somebody gets access to the key or if they can work around ways to decrypt that specific file that has been now encrypted and protected. So hashing can't be reversed. Encryption can be reversed. Just keep that in mind. This is our visual comparison here. So encryption and decryption, this is actually very similar to the images that we saw when we were looking at symmetric or asymmetric encryption. So plain text gets encrypted, the encrypted text can't be read, and then you can decrypt that encrypted text and turn it back into plain text. Hashing, however, you have the plain text version of this. There's some kind of a hash function that's being used to hash it, and then it gets turned into hash text. There is no decryption of that. There is no reversal of that. The only way that can be done is by already knowing what the plain text version of this was. If you send the hashed version of it, and again, this could be the hashed version of a software. So here's a really good example. So we are on the Kali Linux website. You go to get Kali so you can look at the various ISO images. And let's say I want to use any of these ARM images that I have here. And then I go here, and so the Raspberry Pi version of Kali Linux, I can go and click on some, and now it's going to show me the hash value, the SHA-256 hash value of this particular ISO image that I want to download from Kali. Now, the reason why this is important is that there's a lot of websites that, or maybe like Pirate Bay or something like a torrent website, that you say, okay, I'm going to go download it from that website for whatever reason, instead of downloading it directly from Kali Linux. Then if you do that, then you need to, before you do anything else, you go to your command line and you do SHA-256 sum, that's the command, SHA-256 sum, and then you give it the name of the file. And then it will give you the SHA-256 hash value of that file. Now, if that file does not match this hash value, then you have a file that has been tampered with. And my recommendation would be don't use it. Don't download it. Don't install it. None of that stuff, right? If you want to use anything and you want to make sure that it has its original integrity and it hasn't been tampered, then you definitely want to get the original SHA-256 or any hash value that's available from the actual vendor to compare it so that you can see whether or not you have the main file. And that's very, very, very important to understand. You don't just get hash values of plain text. You get hash values of disk images of an entire computer. You get hash values of a software. You get hash values of a file. Anything has a hash value, and you can always compare that hash value to the next version of it just so you can ensure whether or not that file has been altered or tampered with. Encoding is just the transformation of data into a specific format for compatibility or transmission, and this can actually be reversed without a key. So if you have something that's been base 64 encoded, for example, then you can actually decode it by going to, oh, this is a really good one. So here's another cool little tool. So we have the CyberChef website, the CyberChef tool. So if you actually go to it, it's actually a GitHub page. So there's not cyberchef.com or anything. But CyberChef is excellent for encoding and decoding. So there's a recipe called 2base64. So I want to encode it to 2base64. So I'll do, this is the text, and then this is the output. This is the base 64 encoded version of what I just put into it. Now, usually when you see these two equal signs at the end of something, that is a pretty dead ringer that this is a base 64 encoding, and you can just go to CyberChef and decode whatever that string is. So if I take this now and I copy that and I go up here and then I paste it in here, it's going to give me a different base 64 encoding, right? Because it's focused on converting this into base 64. So what I can do is I can turn that off and then go from base 64, and then now this original input has been converted back into the plain text, which is, this is the text, right? That's what I put in here. So CyberChef is actually a really, really cool website. We use this a lot for security analysis. You can decode URLs. You can look at something and a regular expression and either define your own regular expression or break something back from a regular expression, create regular expression patterns, for example. You can convert something to hexadecimal. You can convert something from hexadecimal. You can do something called fanging. So you can fang a URL or defang a URL. And that basically means you turn it so that it's not clickable. So if you're generating a report for somebody and it's a malicious URL, you can actually make it so that it's not clickable. So if I go ahead and put this right here and just do google.com, and we can go ahead and fang it. So I don't know why it's not fanging my URL. It's supposed to fang it. Or actually, I'm sorry, defanging. So fanging means it is clickable. Defanging means it's not clickable. My bad. So when you defang it, it puts this over here, these brackets around all of the dots, basically. So if there was www, then it would do www square bracket dot close square bracket Google square bracket dot. And so what that means is that this is now no longer clickable. So if I wanted to include this inside of a report for my CEO, then I would do it this way so that the CEO doesn't accidentally click on the domain name and now their computer is compromised, right? So that's your job as the security analyst, is to defang any URL or defang any IP address before you include it in a report and send it off to your specific C-suite executive. So that's a way that you can use CyberChef along with, encoding. So you can use CyberChef to encode something. You can use CyberChef to decode something. And it's not confidential. It's not secure, as you already saw. That's not the whole point of it. What it does is that it transforms it into a format for either compatibility or to transmit something, because there may be whatever service or software you're using that says, oh, I only support base64 encoding. So if you want to base64 encode data to embed it into text, so if you want to embed binary data into text, you would need to actually convert it into base64 encoding before you can actually do that. So encoding is not secure, it's not confidential, there is no key that's been attached to it, so you can reverse the encoding by going to a website like CyberChef. So those things are this is not a part of encoding. It's just mainly used for compatibility and transmission. And so there's something called Adobe Media Encoder that converts files. So for example, it'll convert a video file from MP4 to I don't know, think about another one, a WAV file or something like that, right? So it's for transmission and compatibility. It has nothing to do with security. So just keep that in mind. Hashing, encryption, and encoding are very, very different. Hashing preserves integrity. That's the whole purpose of it. There is no reversibility of it, and there's a lot of different algorithms, as you saw from CrackStation. Encryption is for confidentiality, and it can be reversed with the key. And then we have our different encryption standards and algorithms. Encoding is for compatibility and transmission. It is reversible. You don't need a key. And there's a lot of different encoding versions as well. So this is the difference between hashing, encryption, and encoding. So what are the practical applications of cryptography? So we have securing web traffic, right? So cryptography using asymmetric encryption, which is, for example, the RSA encryption algorithm. And it's done through HTTPS, which is port 443, and it's done for key exchange, and symmetric encryption is done for session data, right? So you use RSA for key exchange, and then once you actually are inside of the session, symmetric encryption like AES, advanced encryption, is used for the data inside of that session. So you can actually use both of them in the same process, as we established in our earlier examples as well. You have digital signatures, so using asymmetric encryption to verify the authenticity of a sender and the ensuring of the non-repudiation, right? So they can't deny that they sent something because their digital signature was verified through the asymmetric encryption. You have password storage, so passwords are hashed inside of the etc shadow file inside of Linux, for example. You have hashed values of the passwords instead of the plain text values so that you can store them, and in case anybody gets access to our shadow file, then they won't be able to dehash it, right? They can't reverse the hash, because especially if it's a strong password, as we already established, then it doesn't matter if they have the hash value because it can't be reversed with just a basic rainbow table. So password storage is typically done with hashed values. Blockchain technology is a more modern implementation of this. Blockchain uses SHA-256 for hashing blocks and digital signatures for transaction verification. So they don't look at plain text or anything that would be sensitive. They look at the SHA-256 hash value to verify the transaction that's been done. And that's one of the big things about blockchain technology that people are really excited about, is that, like, if you have the original NFT, for example, which I feel like kind of lost its steam for a long time now, but NFTs are connected to SHA-256 hash values, meaning that that specific NFT is the original NFT. Blockchain technology can be used to verify contracts. So if you actually want to send the contract to somebody and verify the identity of somebody. So let's say I have to my name my SHA-256 value, but somebody else also wants to use my identity, and so they just steal my name, but their SHA-256 value is different from mine, and it can only be measured to my SHA-256. Does that make sense? So it's like, that's how you verify your identity, because if anybody else in any way has any other hash value, then they are not you. And that's very important to understand. So SHA-256 is actually very, very powerful. And I think it's going to become more powerful as we progress in tech and we start using blockchain technology more often. That's one of the big things that's going to be used to verify somebody's identity or verifying transactions or signatures, so on and so forth. And then we have, of course, file integrity. So hashing ensures that files have not been tampered with during download or transfer. And this could be with files, it could be with disk images, it could be with document, text, any of those things. So real world story that we have here is by Edward Snowden, or it's of Snowden. When Edward Snowden leaked the stuff that he leaked in 2013, and they actually made a movie out of it too. And now he lives in Russia or something because he's really on the shit list of America. Snowden leaked in 2013 the government surveillance programs or government surveillance data, including all of the stuff that the NSA was doing to weaken encryption standards. So the revelation was significantly impacting the public trust in government surveillance agencies and raised concern about the security of widely used encryption technologies. So essentially, he was just kind of putting the government on blast, which is why the government has it out for him. The focus was to get stronger cryptography. So because the leaks spurred a new, renewed focus on developing and deploying stronger, more resistant encryption algorithms and protocols, that was what came out of this whole thing. So he put them on blast, and now they have to do stronger cryptography. This led to increased interest in open source cryptography and a push for greater transparency in the development and standardization of cryptographic algorithms. So he did a lot of great things for the public, which is why the government hates him. Like, obviously, you put the government on blast and you tell them how they're messing up, and you do it for the interest of the public, but now the government has it out for you. So he did a lot of, he made a pretty big sacrifice for the greater good of everybody else in the world. The takeaways that we have is that when he leaked those things, his leaks highlighted the critical importance of strong cryptography for protecting privacy and security in the digital age. Because if the government is weak in their encryption standard, that means any of our state enemies that don't want the United States to succeed, or don't want the UK to succeed, or don't want Europe to succeed, any of the enemies of our countries can take advantage of us easily because we have weak encryption standards, which is insane to think about. Like, you would think that the government has the highest standard for encryption. Government surveillance programs can pose a significant threat to individual privacy and the security of digital communications. We already knew this. I mean, if you're even the slightest amount of conspiracy theory believer, you should already know that the government is totally surveilling all of us. As I'm recording this, they're probably watching me on my freaking laptop camera. It emphasized the need for robust, independent oversight of government surveillance activities and the importance of transparency in the development and deployment of cryptographic technologies. So you want to have independent but robust oversight, which is why the open source element of it was introduced, and oversight of the government. So you want the government to be governed, right? So government surveillance and all of those activities should be surveilled, and then there should be transparency in that development and the deployment of those technologies so that everybody knows at the very least, yeah, we know you're watching us, but we want you to be transparent with it, and we don't want you to do shady information with our data or shady activities with our data. It's like, at the very least, if you're gonna do the things you're gonna do, try to keep us in mind. The purpose of the government is to work for the people. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, so this example demonstrates how real-world events can significantly impact the development and use of cryptographic technologies. And so that is what we have for our real-world story of cryptography. So let us look at our videos for independent studies, which is the Intro to Cryptography, which is the ciphers, encryption, and decryption, hashing. All of this is available on the channel. So if you just look into Intro to Cryptography, you'll be able to find that. And then we have the Password Encryption Cryptography 101. So this goes specifically into encryption of passwords and, of course, hashing, so on and so forth. So these are very, very important videos for you to check out for your independent studies. So that being said, let us now jump into our practice questions for section 1C. All right, so here we go, cryptography practice questions. So what is the primary purpose of cryptography? Is it to organize data for storage, protect information by making it unreadable to unauthorized users, compress data to save space, or encode data to be compatible with multiple platforms? So as we looked at everything, I mean, you should know that the answer should jump right out at you. The purpose of cryptography, to encrypt something, is to protect that information by making it unreadable to unauthorized users. Organizing data for storage, not really the purpose of cryptography. That sounds more like just compressing files to me. Compressing data to save space, same thing, right? These two kind of go hand in hand. A and C go hand in hand for me. Encoding data to be compatible, that is encoding. Has nothing to do with cryptography. So the answer would be to protect information by making it unreadable to unauthorized users. Now, which cryptographic objective ensures that data has not been altered during transmission? So let's think about it, right? So we have the four different, these are all elements of cryptography, right? Confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. But we've already discussed this so many times that, again, this should also jump right out at you. So integrity is the element that ensures that things have not been altered. There has not been any data tampering. Confidentiality keeps it secret, right? Authentication makes sure that only the person that is actually logged in and authorized to do it is the person that's doing it. Non-repudiation means you can't take it back. You can't deny that you didn't send the data or interact with that system. So the only thing that can be guaranteeing alteration, the only thing that even addresses alteration, would be integrity. What is the main difference between encryption and hashing? So encryption is what? It encrypts something that can be decrypted using a key. Hashing can't be reversed, right? And hashing is more for making sure that the integrity of data or the integrity of the file or the system has been kept. Encryption has nothing to do with integrity. Encryption has to do with confidentiality, right? So encryption is reversible, hashing is not. That is true. Encryption ensures integrity. That's already wrong, because hashing is what is ensuring integrity. Hashing ensures confidentiality. So this is reverse, right? So encryption ensures confidentiality. Hashing ensures integrity. So that's wrong. Encryption is faster than hashing. That is not necessarily true. Hashing is actually very quick. As you already saw, it's as simple as clicking a button and now I can hash it. Encryption, based on the encryption algorithm that you use, it could actually be much slower. And then we have encryption converts data into a fixed length string. That is also hashing. So these things are definitely not true. This is not true. So the main difference would actually be A. It's actually the only correct answer. Which of the following is a characteristic of symmetric encryption? So symmetric, my accent kicked in. So symmetric encryption uses one key. We talked about this, right? So it uses one key. It's fast, it's quick, it's simple. It can only be decrypted using the key. So it means that the key is the most important element because we're only using one key, so we have to secure the key transfer. So these are the characteristics that we have of encryption. So using two keys is not right. That's asymmetric. So that's a wrong answer. It's faster and less resource intensive than asymmetric. That is true. Provides digital signatures for non-repudiation. That is not true. It has nothing to do with symmetric encryption. I don't think so anyway. That I believe only applies to asymmetric encryption, and it eliminates the need for secure key exchange. That is also not true because it heavily relies on secure key exchange because we're only dealing with one key. So the only answer that I can think of would be B, which is it's faster and it's less resource intensive than asymmetric encryption. What is an example of asymmetric encryption algorithm? So if we're going to think about it, okay, so asymmetric is the one that has two keys. AES was Advanced Encryption Standard, that was symmetric. DES was the Data Encryption Standard, and then triple DES is just another version of this. So the only one that I can think of is RSA, which I don't even, Rivest something. I call it a really secure algorithm. But the way that I recognize this is process of elimination. So I will know that AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, is actually the symmetric, and then DES and 3DES are along the same path. So ES is kind of our giveaway here. Encryption standard is our giveaway here, which means RSA is the only one that is asymmetric. So why is asymmetric encryption often used for secure key exchange, right? So it uses the same key for encryption and decryption. That's not true because it uses two keys. So that's wrong. It eliminates the need to securely share a private key. Okay, maybe it is faster than the symmetric encryption. That's definitely wrong because symmetric is faster. It generates smaller ciphertext compared to symmetric encryption. That just sounds like bullshit to me. I don't think that's even relevant. So the only thing that I can think about is it eliminates the need to securely share a private key because symmetric encryption has a key and you have to securely share that key. So asymmetric eliminates that need and it's used to actually send over the private key. So asymmetric encryption eliminates the need to securely share the private key because it has the public and the private keys. So they're separate, so you no longer have to worry about sending that key, right? So symmetric relies on the sharing of the key. Asymmetric, it just eliminates that. The only thing that it's worried about is computational power and the ability for something to process the data, right? So which of the following is a disadvantage of asymmetric encryption compared to symmetric encryption? So asymmetric encryption is not less secure. I would not say that it's less secure. It is slower and more resource intensive. So that would be something that asymmetric is not doing correctly or not doing better, right? Symmetric is actually the faster one. So that would be my answer so far. It cannot be used to secure communication. That's also not true because you can use asymmetric for secure communication. We're doing it on our web browser. We do it for our emails. It can't handle large volumes of data. That's also not true because you can technically deal with large volumes of data with asymmetric encryption as well. So that it's technically designed. So symmetric is technically designed to handle large volumes of data, but it doesn't mean that asymmetric can't do it, right? So that's kind of like one of those little tricky responses. So my obvious answer, again, right, going back to just finding the obvious answer that kind of jumps out at you, my obvious answer would be that it's slower and more resource intensive, and that is the right answer. What does the AES algorithm use for encryption? So AES algorithm is a symmetric algorithm. So it won't use public and private keys because that would be asymmetric. Symmetric algorithm only uses one key. If there's public and private keys, that means that we're talking about asymmetric, so that has nothing to do with it. Does it use a hashing function? No, it doesn't because it's not a hashing algorithm. It uses a symmetric key. That's true. A digital certificate, that is not true, because a digital certificate, as we looked at the Google certificate, that's actually a part of asymmetric encryption, which uses the public and private keys. So the only action that I have, or the only answer that I have, would be the symmetric key. All right, next one, we have the SHA-256 is commonly used for which purpose? So SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm. It is used for securing passwords. It's used for I guess hashing passwords. Is also used for, as we saw, looking at the integrity of files, or if you're downloading an ISO image. So it's used for a lot of different things. It also is something that was attached to the public key of the certificate that we looked at for Google. So SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm. So does it encrypt large files? No, because it's not an encryption standard like that. Does it? And by the way, encryption can be decrypted, right? So hash algorithms cannot be reversed. So keep that in mind. So encryption can be decrypted. SHA-256 hashes cannot be reversed. So that's one big key. Creating a fixed length hash for data integrity. That's definitely, it jumps out as immediately true. Exchanging keys between systems. That is not true, because we typically use to exchange the key, we would use an asymmetric encryption standard to send over a symmetric key. So that's not true. Encoding data for transmission, no, because it's not an encoding algorithm. So the only thing that stands out is creating a fixed length hash for data integrity, and that is indeed the right answer. The next one we got is, which cryptographic algorithm is most often used for digital signatures? So digital signatures is a part of the asymmetric encryption. So if we're looking at asymmetric encryption, we need to first eliminate the symmetric answers, which would be AES and DES, which are symmetric answers. SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm, so it has nothing to do with digital signatures. So the only thing that I can think about would be RSA, which is the only asymmetric encryption standard, and boom. There it is right there. So which of the following is not true about hashing? Hashing is a one-way function. That is true. You can't reverse it. Hashing ensures confidentiality of data. That's not true, because it has nothing to do with confidentiality. It has everything to do with integrity. Hashing is used to verify data integrity. Yeah, that's true. The output of hashing is a fixed length value. That's also true. So the only thing I can think about is it has nothing to do with confidentiality. It has everything to do with integrity, and that's not true about hashing. So there we go. Which of the following statements about encoding is correct? Encoding secures data by converting into ciphertext. Has nothing to do with security. Just keep that in mind. Encoding has nothing to do with security. It ensures the integrity of the data. Has nothing to do with integrity. Encoding converts data into a specific format for compatibility. That is the most true. And it is a reversible or irreversible process. That's also not true. Encoding is very easily reversed, and we can do it with a public service like CyberChef. So it converts data into a specific format. That would be the answer. What is the primary distinction between encryption and encoding? Okay, so think about it. Encryption and encoding. Encryption is reversible, encoding is not. That's not true, because encryption is reversible, encoding is also reversible. So that's not true. Encryption requires a key, encoding does not. That's true. You don't need a key to decode something. You do need a key to decrypt something. Encryption ensures data compatibility. No. Encoding ensures confidentiality. No. This is reversed. So this would be vice versa. Encryption is confidentiality. Encoding is compatibility. Encryption uses a hash function. That is not true. Encoding does not. That also is not true. So these things, this is completely jargon. This is nothing to do. It's rubbish. This is reverse, so that's not true. Encryption requires a key. That's true. Encoding does not. That would be my answer. Boom. There we go. All right. So in which scenario would symmetric encryption most likely be used? So symmetric encryption, right? So singular key, quick, and it is done for large data sets, and that would be kind of the big data points, or the big features of symmetric encryption that stand out to me. So it uses one key. It's used for large data. The reliance of the key is the transference of the key is the biggest piece about it, and of course it's fast. So securing web traffic on HTTPS is not what we're doing, because as we looked at the Google certificate example, you need a public and a private key to go through HTTPS, which is the communication. So that's not it. Encrypting large volumes of data in a database, that's definitely one. Exchanging keys between two parties, that is not it. So exchanging the keys between the two parties. The key itself is the part of symmetric encryption. So the key is very, very important. So you won't use symmetric encryption to exchange the key. You would use asymmetric encryption, which is securing the traffic. You would use that to exchange the key. And then that key is the most important part of symmetric encryption. So this is definitely not it either. And then creating digital signatures for email authentication, that's also a part of asymmetric encryption. So the only thing I can think of is encrypting large volumes of data. Very good. Okay, moving on. So what is the role of hashing in password storage? Encrypting is the password. Encrypting the password for secure storage, that would actually be a good role for hashing. I'll talk about that. I don't like the word encrypting because that means that it could be decrypted and hashing can't be reversed. So, but that is kind of a good one. That's good. Creating a one-way hash to verify the password without storing it in plain text. That's also really good. I think that's a better answer. Encoding the password to ensure compatibility, nothing to do with it. Securing the password with a symmetric key, nothing to do with it. So it's the difference between A or B. I'm going to say B, and that is indeed the answer, because just the word encrypting is implying that it could be decrypted, and I don't like that. So it can't be decrypted. Hashing can't be reversed or decrypted, and that's very important to understand. We do use it for secure storage for passwords, that's true, but it's a one-way hash to verify the password without actually storing it in plain text. One way meaning it can't be reversed, right? That's very important. So, what cryptographic function would you use to verify the integrity of a downloaded file? Cryptographic function to verify the integrity of a download. So, integrity means what? Hash value, and that is immediately. Asymmetric encryption is used to transfer data. Symmetric encryption is used to encrypt the data for large storage or anything of the sort, for fast storage or fast encryption of large data. So those are the things that I would talk about. Encoding is compatibility. Hashing is the only thing that verifies integrity. Boom. All right, so here's our scenario. An organization encrypts a document using a single shared key. Single shared key, symmetric. The recipient uses the same key to decrypt it, symmetric. What type of encryption is being used? Symmetric. Asymmetric uses two keys. Hashing has nothing to do with decryption. Digital signature is a part of asymmetric, which means that it's using two keys. We're using a single key, which is symmetric. A company encrypts emails, so emails, that would be asymmetric encryption, using the recipient's public key, and the recipient decrypts them using their private key. So that's all part of asymmetric, which is a two-way encryption, two-key encryption. An e-commerce site uses an algorithm to create unique hash values for stored passwords. Hash values for stored passwords, ensuring that they can't be reversed. Hash values cannot be reversed. What is most likely being used? AES is a symmetric standard or symmetric algorithm. RSA is an asymmetric algorithm. DES is a symmetric algorithm. SHA-256 is the only type of algorithm that has to do with hash values. And there we go. A secure messaging application uses AES, which is a advanced encryption standard, 256, which is a symmetric standard, to encrypt communications between the users. What type of encryption is AES? It is symmetric. So ES is what I connect to symmetric. So AES, DES, 3DES, all of those things are symmetric encryption. RSA would be asymmetric. Hashing has nothing to do with any of these things. It can be kind of confusing because you see 256 at the end of it, so you're like, oh, SHA-256. And it's like, no, it's not a hashing. We're not talking about that. And we're talking about encryption. So remember, if you see encryption, hashing is automatically out the door because hashing cannot be decrypted. If something is being encrypted, it cannot be decrypted. So keep that. Or if something is encrypted, if something is encrypted, that means it can be decrypted. And so if it can be decrypted, that means it can be reversed. Hashing cannot be reversed. So that immediately deletes that. Digital signature is not a type of encryption. So we're not even thinking about that as an answer. So it's only one of these two. And if it's using AES as our encryption standard, ES encryption standard connects to symmetric. This is how I connect it in my mind. Okay, so hopefully that kind of helps you as well. RSA, because, and this is again, right? AES ends with an S, symmetric. RSA ends with an A, asymmetric. These are the ways that I have made these connections in my brain. So hopefully that helps you. Developer stores user passwords in the database as cryptographic hash values, ensuring that they cannot be decrypted, right? They can't be reversed. So we're talking about hashes. So what technique is being used here? We're talking about hashes. They can't be, so now here's the cryptographic hash values, ensuring they cannot be decrypted. Encryption can be decrypted. Encoding has nothing to do with security. Symmetric encryption is again another version of encryption that can be decrypted. The only thing that cannot be decrypted is hashing. There we go. An application encodes the text into base 64, so it's encoding. It encodes the text into base 64 format to safely transmit over HTTP, then decodes it on the receiving end. I mean, it's not hashing because hashing can't be decoded or reversed. Encryption has to do with confidentiality, and compression kind of could be connected to encoding, but the answer is literally right there. It's encoded and then it's going to be decoded. Encoding is the answer that we're looking for. So that was it. That's all we had for the practice questions for the 1C section on cryptography. Hopefully you got a lot of value out of that. If you want these practice questions, just keep that in mind that you can get it as an agent member of Hackaholics Anonymous, as well as everything that is also available inside of our document, our Security Plus document at the very, very end, where we have our practice examinations and everything else that's available for us. All of that is going to be available to all of our cyber agent members of Hackaholics Anonymous. So if you haven't done so already, definitely make sure that you check that out so that you can get access to this notes document, all of these practice examinations, as well as, of course, this massive slideshow that has all of our practice questions. So without further ado, let us go into section 2. And the first section of that is the types of threat actors. So now we've covered all the basics. Now we need to start looking at the people that are actually trying to attack us, which is very, very important inside of the security environment. That's like your biggest goal, is to know about your threat actors and protect against those threat actors. So let's get into it. This Security Plus training series is sponsored by Hackaholics Anonymous, which is the premier YouTube community for security professionals and hackers. And to get access to the training documents for Security Plus, as well as all of the practice questions inside of that slideshow, as well as the mock examination links that are available in the documents, you would join Hackaholics Anonymous as either a cyber agent, cyber guardian, or a cyber master. And if you join as any one of those tiers, you get exclusive downloads, which includes all of these Security Plus training documents and mock exams, so on and so forth. But you would also get Python automations for system administration, cybersecurity, pen testing. You would get access to live streams that go on monthly with me, Discord servers for advanced members, exclusive downloads, exclusive content, and of course a myriad of other things as well. And it would be my pleasure to actually see you inside of Hackaholics Anonymous. And to be able to join, you would need to simply just click the link in the description below. You can also come to our homepage on the channel and just click on this simple little join button that we have over here, or you can go to youtube.com/hankhackshackers/join, and that would give you access to that little pop-up that you just saw, which shows you all of the different tiers of Hackaholics Anonymous.